beneath the golden sun and endless sands. Ancient Egypt rose a world of towering pyramids, silent tombs, and gods carved into stone. But behind the grandeur were farmers along the Nile, workers under the scorching heat, and a civilization that grew slowly, patiently, for thousands of years. Tonight, we'll drift through the entire story of ancient Egypt from the first pharaohs to the whispers of the desert winds that still carry their legacy. If quiet journeys through timeless empires help you rest, subscribe and tap the bell icon. We'll keep exploring history's greatest civilizations, softly and slowly, one story at a time. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. You wake before the sun touches the limestone walls of your modest chamber adjacent to the temple complex at Memphis. The year is 1250 BCE, during the reign of Ramesses II, and you are Kamwa-Setna, the famous prince, but merely one of thousands of scribes whose reed pens scratch across papyrus day after endless day, preserving the mundane machinery of the world's oldest bureaucracy. The pre-dawn ritual begins, as it has for the past 15 years of your career. You dip your hands into the clay water basin beside your sleeping mat, the coolness shocking you into full consciousness. The water is precious, carried, bucket by bucket, from the sacred lake behind the temple by junior priests, who regard this task as spiritual purification. But for you, it's simply the beginning of another day spent hunched over documents that will outlive dynasties, recording transactions that seem insignificant, yet hold together an empire spanning from Nubia to the Euphrates. Your modest room contains exactly what the state has allocated to a mid-level scribe: a reed mat for sleeping, a wooden headrest that has left permanent indentations on the base of your skull, a clay storage jar for your personal water ration, and a cedar chest containing your professional tools. The chest holds reed pens in various states of wear, cakes of black and red ink that you mix fresh each morning, pumice stones for smoothing papyrus surfaces, and a collection of astrachlumstone flakes used for practice writing and casual notes that don't warrant precious papyrus. The process of preparing your writing implements is a meditation in tedium. Each reed pen must be carefully chewed at the tip until the fibers separate into a brush-like structure capable of holding ink. This daily ritual has left distinctive wear patterns on your jaw joints that will someday puzzle archaeologists examining your skeleton. You place the reed between your molars and work it systematically, the bitter taste of plant fiber mixing with the early morning dryness in your mouth. Too much chewing, and the tip becomes too flexible to form crisp hieroglyphs. Too little, and it won't hold sufficient ink for more than a few characters. The ink preparation requires equal precision. Black ink, made from carbon soot mixed with gum arabic and water, serves for the body text of documents. Red ink, derived from ochre, marks titles, beginnings of paragraphs, and corrections, a system so standardized that a scribe in Memphis uses identical conventions to one working in Thebes or Elephantine. You grind the dried ink cakes against a small pallet made of green schist, adding drops of water until the consistency matches what your training taught you to recognize by sight and feel as the first light of dawn creeps through the single window rectangular opening covered with a wooden lattice. You begin the physical preparation that will determine whether this day ends in productive work or chronic pain. The three postures available to scribes have been depicted on tomb walls throughout Egypt: standing at a high desk, kneeling with your writing board resting on your thighs, or sitting cross-legged with your kilt stretched tight to form a makeshift writing surface. Experience has taught you that standing promotes alertness but causes lower back pain after the first few hours. Sitting cross-legged allows for longer sessions but creates circulation problems and puts strain on your hip joints. Kneeling represents a compromise. though it inevitably leads to the characteristic indentations archaeologists will someday find on the kneecaps of professional scribes. You choose kneeling for the morning shift. Knowing you'll transition to sitting after the midday meal break, you're writing borda. Polished piece of sycamore wood about the length of your forearm bears the accumulated stains and scratches of years of daily use. The surface has been worn smooth by countless sheets of papyrus, and the edges show indentations where you've habitually rested the heels of your hands while writing. Two small depressions near the top hold your ink cakes, and a groove along one edge serves as a pen rest. The first rays of sunlight signal the beginning of the official workday. From throughout the temple complex comes the sound of awakening activity, priests beginning their purification rituals, servants carrying water and food supplies, the distant lowing of cattle being led to temple pasture lands. Your work environment fills with the familiar sounds that will provide the background rhythm for the next 10 hours of meticulous copying, calculation, and record keeping. Your first task each morning is reviewing the previous day's work for errors. This quality control process, mandated by temple regulations, requires you to examine every hieroglyph for accuracy, every calculation for mathematical precision, every name for proper spelling. The consequences of errors range from loss of daily bread rations for minor mistakes to reassignment to manual labor for repeated carelessness. The pressure for perfection transforms even routine copying into an exercise in sustained concentration. Today's primary assignment involves transcribing grain inventory records from the temple's agricultural estates scattered throughout Middle Egypt. The papyrus scrolls before you contain columns of numbers representing barley harvests from individual fields, each figure representing weeks of agricultural labor by hundreds of farmers whose names appear nowhere in the documentation. You will spend the morning converting these raw tallies into the standardized reporting format required by the Central Treasury in Memphis, ensuring that every grain of barley is accounted for in the vast ledger system that tracks Egypt's agricultural wealth. The mathematics involved appears simple: addition, subtraction, basic fractions, but the Egyptian number system makes every calculation a test of mental endurance. Numbers are expressed through additive hieroglyphs, vertical strokes for ones, heel-bone symbols for tens, coiled ropes for hundreds, lotus flowers for thousands. Computing the total barley yield from 17 different estates requires manipulating strings of symbols that stretch across entire lines of papyrus, with each intermediate sum subject to verification through parallel calculations using different methodological approaches. As you work, your posture settles into the characteristic configuration that will eventually mark your skeleton as clearly as a craftsman's tool marks identify his trade. Your head tilts forward at an angle that strains your cervical vertebrae. Your shoulders curve inward to bring your arms closer to the writing surface, and your spine flexes in a gentle C-curve that seems natural now but will cause chronic pain in your later years. Your right thumb and forefinger maintain a constant pincer grip on the reed pen, the pressure creating calluses that serve as permanent evidence of your profession. The temple scriptorium, where you work, houses 12 other scribes, each focused on specialized administrative functions. Amenhotep, seated to your left, spends his days copying religious texts for use in daily temple rituals, his work requiring perfect accuracy, since any error in a sacred formula could invalidate the entire ceremony. Tomos, across the room, maintains personnel records for the temple's workforce, which priests serve, which shifts, recording sick days and disciplinary actions, calculating food rations and clothing allowances for hundreds of employees. The social dynamics of the scriptorium reflect the broader hierarchies of Egyptian society compressed into a single room. Senior scribes, distinguished by their ability to write in multiple scripts and their knowledge of complex mathematical procedures, occupy choice positions near the windows where natural light reduces eye strain. Junior scribes work in the dimmer interior areas, often spending years copying the same types of documents before gaining access to more varied assignments. Conversation during work hours is officially forbidden, but a system of subtle communication has evolved that allows scribes to share information, warn of approaching supervisors, and maintain the social connections that make long days bearable. A particular way of clearing your throat signals that the chief scribe is approaching. Tapping your pen against your ink palette twice means you need to borrow a tool. A specific sequence of stretching movements indicates that you've discovered an error in a source document that will require collaborative verification. The morning progresses with the steady rhythm of reed pens scratching against papyrus, punctuated by the occasional pause as someone mixes fresh ink or carefully erases an error with a dampened cloth. The grain inventory grows line by line, each entry representing not just numbers, but the economic foundation of an empire. These barley yields will determine tax assessments for the coming year, influence decisions about military campaigns that require feeding thousands of soldiers, and affect the distribution of temple offerings that maintain the divine favor, essential to Egypt's prosperity. But as the sun climbs higher and the limestone walls begin to radiate heat that will make the afternoon hours nearly unbearable, you find your concentration beginning to fragment. The endless columns of numbers blur slightly, and you realize that you've been staring at the same calculation for several minutes without making progress. This is the moment when errors multiply, when the tedium of perfect accuracy begins to feel like a weight pressing down on your shoulders. Yet you know that this work, boring as it may seem, represents the invisible foundation upon which all of Egypt's grandeur rests. Without scribes like you, the pyramids could never have been built. The temples could never have been maintained. The armies could never have been supplied. And the complex irrigation systems that turn desert into farmland could never have been coordinated. Your reed pen may seem insignificant compared to a pharaoh's scepter or a general's bronze sword. But it is your pen and thousands like it that make those symbols of power possible. As the morning wears on and your posture settles deeper into the configuration that marks your profession, you begin to wonder, what would happen if, just once, you deliberately introduced an error into these endless calculations? Would the vast administrative machine of Egypt even notice if a single temple's grain inventory was off by a few bushels? And what does it mean about the nature of power and precision that your daily discomfort serves to maintain an accuracy that may be far more exact than the system actually requires? The midday break arrives with the sound of a bronze gong struck 3 times, a signal that echoes through the temple complex and brings temporary relief to backs curved over writing surfaces. Eyes strained from deciphering faded hieroglyphs and hands cramped around reed pens. You set down your writing implement with a careful precision that has become automatic after years of practice, ensuring that the tip doesn't touch anything that might damage the carefully chewed brush fibers. You spent precious minutes preparing. At dawn, your body unfolds from the kneeling position with audible protests from joints that have maintained unnatural angles for the past 4 hours. The characteristic ache in your lower back provides a familiar punctuation to the transition between morning work and midday rest, a daily reminder of the physical cost extracted by your profession. Around you, 12 other scribes perform the same ritual of careful tool storage and cautious stretching, each movement economized to avoid wasting energy that must be conserved for the afternoon session. The midday meal, provided by the temple administration as part of your compensation, consists of bread baked from emmer wheat, a portion of dried fish, and a small jar of beer whose alcohol content has been carefully calculated to provide refreshment without impairing the precision required for afternoon copying tasks. You eat sitting cross-legged on a reed mat in the scriptorium's adjoining rest area, the same posture you've abandoned for writing, but which now provides welcome relief to knees that have borne your weight. Against hard stone floors all morning, this brief respite offers the only opportunity for conversation during the workday. And the topics that emerge reveal the peculiar concerns of men whose lives revolve around the accurate transmission of information they rarely have reason to care about personally. Amenhotep mentions that he's noticed an increase in spelling errors in the religious texts he's been copying, suggesting that the source documents may have been produced by scribes trained in a different regional tradition. Thamos reports that the temple's chief administrator has implemented new procedures for tracking sick leave that will require additional paperwork for every absence, no matter how brief. These conversations, seemingly mundane, actually represent a form of quality control that operates parallel to the official oversight system. Scribes notice patterns in the documents, they process recurring errors that suggest problems in the original record keeping, inconsistencies that hint at changes in administrative procedures, anomalies that might indicate corruption or incompetence at higher levels. This informal information network helps maintain the accuracy of the vast bureaucratic system, but it also creates a peculiar form of professional alienation. You spend your days intimately familiar with the economic details of estates. You'll never visit the personnel problems of departments you'll never see, the religious ceremonies you'll transcribe but never participate in. The grain yields you calculated this morning represent the labor of thousands of farmers whose names you'll never know, working fields you'll never walk through, harvesting crops you'll consume only in the processed form of daily bread rations. Your expertise lies not in understanding the systems you document, but in maintaining the documentary precision that allows those systems to function. After the meal, you return to your position in the scriptorium with the resigned efficiency. I'm someone who has performed the same routine thousands of times. The afternoon heat has begun to build in the limestone walls, creating a sluggish atmosphere that makes sustained concentration increasingly difficult. The natural light that made morning work tolerable has shifted angles, creating shadows that fall across your writing surface at precisely the most inconvenient places. Your afternoon assignment involves a different type of document: judicial records from regional courts that must be copied and filed in the central archives maintained by the temple. These texts require a different kind of attention than the mathematical precision demanded by grain inventories. Legal proceedings generate narratives that must be transcribed with absolute fidelity to the original wording, since any alteration could affect the outcome of future cases that cite these precedents. The cases themselves provide glimpses into the daily conflicts that arise when thousands of people live and work together under the complex regulations that govern Egyptian society. A dispute over water rights between two farmers whose fields share an irrigation canal. A complaint against a potter who delivered ceramic vessels that cracked during normal use. A family quarrel over inheritance rights that has escalated to the point where formal legal intervention became necessary. As you copy these proceedings, you become aware that you're participating in a system of justice that provodolide/is that code operates through documentary precision. The judges who heard these cases relied on written precedents, statutory regulations, and standardized procedures that exist only because scribes like you have spent generations copying and recopying the texts that define legal norms. Your afternoons work creates documents that future judges will consult when facing similar disputes, making you an invisible participant in legal decisions that may not be made for years or decades. The physical demands of legal copying differ from those of mathematical calculation in ways that highlight the specialized nature of scribal work. Legal texts contain more complex vocabulary, requiring frequent reference to lexical aids lists of standard terms and their proper hieroglyphic representations that must be consulted to ensure accuracy. The sentences are longer and more complex than the brief phrases used in inventory records, requiring sustained attention to grammatical relationships that span multiple lines of text. Moreover, legal documents often contain direct quotations testimony from witnesses, statements by plaintiffs and defendants, pronouncements by judges that must be marked with special notation to indicate their status as reported speech. This requires switching between different ink colors and adjusting your writing style to accommodate the quotation markers that distinguish various speakers. Adding layers of visual complexity to documents that must remain perfectly legible despite their elaborate formatting. The afternoon heat continues to build, and you notice that your concentration has begun to develop a peculiar rhythm. Periods of intense focus on individual hieroglyphs alternate with moments when your attention drifts to the sounds filtering in. From outside, the scriptorium priests chanting in the temple proper, servants carrying supplies through the corridors. The distant noise of construction work on a new chapel being added to the complex. These moments of distraction are dangerous, since they are precisely when errors are most likely to occur. Your colleagues around you display the same pattern of fluctuating attention. Thomas has begun making small mistakes in his personnel records, crossing out errors and starting lines over in a way that creates unsightly documents requiring complete recopying. Amenhotep's religious texts show signs of fatigue hieroglyphs that are slightly malformed, spacing that becomes irregular, ink density that varies as his attention wavers. The afternoon shift represents the most challenging period of the workday, when physical discomfort and mental fatigue combine to threaten the accuracy that justifies your existence. Yet it is precisely during these difficult hours that the true nature of scribal work becomes most apparent. Anyone can copy documents when feeling fresh and alert. Maintaining accuracy when tired, uncomfortable, and bored requires a different kind of discipline. This is the quality that separates professional scribes from the literate amateurs who might be capable of reading and writing but lack the endurance necessary for sustained documentary work. As you progress through the legal cases, you begin to notice patterns that reveal the social tensions underlying Egypt's apparent stability. Many of the disputes involve conflicts between different systems of authority, traditional village customs clashing with royal regulations. Temple privileges. Conflicting with civil law, individual property rights challenging collective agricultural arrangements. Your copying work makes you a repository of information about social conflicts that the participants themselves may not fully understand. These patterns accumulate in your memory over months and years of copying similar documents, creating a unique perspective on Egyptian society that exists nowhere else. Officials see only the cases that reach their level of authority. Judges hear only the disputes brought to their courts. Administrators track only the problems that require bureaucratic intervention. But scribes like you encounter the full spectrum of social conflicts. Filtered through the documentary procedures that transform personal grievances into official records, the sun has moved far enough across the sky. That direct light no longer enters through the scriptorium's windows, creating the dim conditions that make the final hours of the workday most trying. You light a small oil lamp, one of your personal possessions. Since the temple administration provides illumination only during the morning and early afternoon hours, and continue working by the flickering light that creates moving shadows. Across your papyrus, the legal case you're currently copying involves a complaint by a temple weaver against the linen merchant who supplies her raw materials. She claims that recent deliveries have consisted of inferior flax that breaks during normal weaving processes, creating defective cloth that she cannot deliver to the temple storehouse. The merchant responds that his flax meets the same standards he has maintained for years and suggests that the weaver's techniques have become careless. The judge's decision will establish a precedent for evaluating textile quality. Disputes throughout the region. As you transcribe this seemingly minor commercial disagreement, you realize that your work connects you to economic relationships that span the entire Mediterranean world. The flax in question was grown on estates in the Delta region, processed by workers whose specialized knowledge represents generations of accumulated technique. transported by boat crews who navigate the Nile according to seasonal flood patterns, and delivered to craftspeople whose skill transforms raw material into finished goods that maintain the temple's ritual requirements. Your reed pen captures not just words, but the documentary traces of a complex economy that functions through the coordination of thousands of individual decisions, the weaver's complaint, the merchant's defense, and the judge's eventual ruling will become part of the legal precedent that guides future commercial relationships, influencing the behavior of people who will never see this particular document, but whose activities will be shaped by the legal principles it establishes. But as the afternoon light continues to fade and your oil lamp burns lower, you find yourself wondering about the aspects of these disputes that never appear in official records. What personal relationships existed between the weaver and the merchant before this conflict arose? How did their disagreement affect their families, their other business associations, their standing in their respective communities? What compromises might have been possible if the dispute had not escalated to formal legal proceedings? The documentary system that employs you captures only those aspects of human conflict that can be reduced to standardized legal categories, measured against established precedents, and resolved through bureaucratic procedures. But the lived experience of these disputes, the emotions, the personal histories, the social consequences remains invisible in the official record, preserved only in the memories of participants whose perspectives will never be transcribed. On to papyrus, and as the day's work draws toward its conclusion and your back aches from hours spent hunched over documents, you begin to contemplate the strangest aspect of your professional existence. Your life is dedicated to creating permanent records of temporary conflicts, preserving in documentary form the transient disputes of people whose names and faces you will never know, building archives that will outlast everyone involved in the original events they describe. The final hours of your workday unfold with the peculiar intensity that comes from knowing that completion lies just beyond your immediate endurance. The sun has disappeared behind the temple complex's western wall, and your oil lamp provides the only illumination in a scriptorium now shrouded in gathering darkness. Around you, the other scribes work by similar pools of flickering light, creating an atmosphere that transforms the familiar room into something more mysterious, a place where individual consciousness dissolves into the larger rhythm of documentation that has continued unbroken for centuries. Your afternoon's work on legal precedents has given way to your most challenging daily assignment, copying sections of the administrative correspondence that maintains communication between this temple and the central bureaucracy in Memphis. These documents require the highest level of accuracy because they carry official authority, traveling throughout Egypt to guide decision-making by officials who will never have opportunity to verify the original texts. A single error in transcription could propagate through the administrative system, affecting policies and procedures in ways that might not become apparent for months or years. The correspondence you're copying tonight consists of directives from the vizier's office regarding changes in tax assessment procedures for temple agricultural estates. The modifications appear minor slight adjustments to the mathematical formulas used to calculate obligations based on field productivity. Small changes in the documentation required to support requests for assessment reductions, new procedures for handling disputes between taxpayers and collection officials. But you understand, from years of experience with similar documents, that these seemingly technical adjustments represent major shifts in economic policy. The new assessment procedures will increase revenue collection from agricultural estates by approximately 15%, providing additional funds for the massive building projects currently underway throughout Egypt. The modified documentation requirements will create additional work for local scribes while giving tax collectors more authority to challenge claims of reduced productivity. The revised dispute procedures will make it more difficult for taxpayers to appeal unfavorable assessments, reducing the administrative burden on regional courts while increasing the likelihood that marginal farmers will lose their land to foreclosure. None of this analysis appears in the document itself, which presents the changes in neutral bureaucratic language that emphasizes procedural efficiency rather than economic consequences. But your professional experience allows you to read between the lines, understanding implications that may not be apparent even to the officials who will implement these new procedures. This gives you a form of expertise that exists nowhere else. In Egyptian society, detailed knowledge of how administrative systems actually function, combined with the analytical perspective that comes from processing thousands of similar documents over the course of your career. As you work, copying each hieroglyph with the mechanical precision that guards against errors, you find yourself thinking about the relationship between the documents you produce and the realities they claim to describe. The tax assessment procedures you're transcribing will affect thousands of farmers whose individual circumstances cannot possibly conform to the standardized categories used in bureaucratic calculations. The mathematical formulas treat all agricultural land as equivalent, ignoring variations in soil quality, irrigation access, and local weather patterns that make some fields consistently more productive than others. Yet these administrative simplifications are necessary to make the tax system manageable. Without standardized procedures, assessment would require individual evaluation of every field in Egypt. It's tasks that would consume more administrative resources than the taxes themselves could generate. The gap between bureaucratic categories and individual realities represents not incompetence or indifference, but the inevitable compromise between precision and practicality that characterizes all large-scale organizational systems. Your read pen continues its steady progress across the papyrus, creating documents that will be stored in temple archives, where they may remain unread for decades before someone needs to consult them for legal or administrative purposes. This raises questions about the nature of the work that occupies your daily existence. Are you creating useful information that serves important social functions? Or are you simply feeding an ever-growing archive that exists primarily to justify its own expansion? The answer, you've come to realize, depends partly on temporal perspective. Many of the documents you copy serve immediate practical purposes, guiding current administrative decisions, supporting ongoing legal proceedings, facilitating communication between distant offices. But the true value of much scribal work becomes apparent only over longer time periods, when accumulated records make possible the kinds of analysis and planning that allow complex societies to adapt to changing circumstances. The temple archives, where your documents will be stored, contain records dating back more than a century, providing information about long-term trends in agricultural productivity, population growth, and economic development that would be impossible to discern from year-to-year observation. This historical data guides current policy decisions in ways that may not be obvious to the officials who use it, since the patterns only become visible when viewed across multiple decades. Your individual contribution to this vast documentary system may seem insignificant, a few dozen papyrus sheets produced each day, recording information that appears routine and unimportant. But these daily contributions accumulate into an institutional memory that provides continuity across changes in administration, knowledge resources that survive the deaths of individual experts, and analytical capabilities that exceed what any single person could achieve through direct observation and personal experience. The physical act of copying has entered the meditative state that characterizes the final hours of each workday. Your hand moves with automatic precision, forming hieroglyphs whose shapes have become so familiar that you no longer need to think consciously about their construction. Your eyes track across the source document with trained efficiency, identifying the boundaries of individual words and phrases without conscious parsing of their semantic content. Your posture has settled into the configuration that minimizes discomfort while maintaining the stability necessary for accurate writing. This state of semi-conscious competence allows part of your attention to drift toward broader contemplation of your role in Egyptian society. You are simultaneously insignificant one scribe among thousands, performing routine tasks that require no special creativity or insight and essential. Since the administrative systems that govern millions of people depend absolutely on the cumulative work of individuals, yourself, your personal identity matters far less than your functional role. Yet that functional role contributes to social achievements that dwarf anything possible through individual action. The contradiction creates a peculiar form of professional satisfaction that differs from the kinds of achievement celebrated in Egyptian literature and art. Your work will never be commemorated in tomb paintings or temple inscriptions. No monuments will preserve your name for future generations. No stories will be told about your accomplishments or your wisdom. Yet your daily labor contributes to the documentary infrastructure that makes possible all the achievements that are celebrated, the pyramids that required precise calculation and coordination, the temples that demanded accurate record-keeping, and resource management, the military campaigns that depended on logistical planning and administrative support. As your oil lamp burns lower and the temple complex settles into the quiet rhythms of evening activity, you complete the final lines of the tax correspondence and begin the meticulous process of quality review that marks the end of each workday. Every hieroglyph must be examined for accuracy, every calculation checked for mathematical precision, every name compared against the spelling used in the source document. This final review often reveals errors that escaped notice during the initial copying, small mistakes that occurred during moments of distraction or fatigue, subtle deviations from standard forms that could create confusion for future readers. The process of correction requires careful consideration of options. Minor errors can sometimes be fixed through careful erasure and overwriting, but this creates documents with visible blemishes that suggest careless work. More serious mistakes may require recopying entire sections or even complete documents, consuming additional time and materials while creating scheduling delays that affect other work assignments. The decision about whether to correct or recopy involves balancing considerations of accuracy, efficiency, and professional pride that have no clear resolution. Tonight, you discover 3 minor errors in your tax correspondence, 2 hieroglyphs that are slightly malformed, and 1 calculation where you transpose digits in a complex multiplication. The hieroglyphs can be corrected through careful overwriting, but the mathematical error requires recopying an entire column of figures to maintain the document's professional appearance. The additional work will delay completion of tomorrow's assignments, creating a cascade of scheduling pressures that will affect the rest of the week. But as you prepare the materials necessary for making corrections, you find yourself reflecting on the deeper implications of this quality control process. The errors you've discovered represent failures of the attention and precision that define professional competence in your field. Yet the fact that you've detected these errors through systematic review demonstrates the effectiveness of the training and procedures that maintain documentary accuracy despite the inherent fallibility of individual scribes. This suggests that the scribal profession has evolved institutional safeguards that make the overall system more reliable than any of its individual participants. Your personal limitations, the moments of inattention that create errors, the physical fatigue that compromises precision, the mental drift that threatens concentration are compensated by organizational procedures that catch and correct mistakes before they propagate through the administrative system. The realization provides a different perspective on the grinding routine that defines your daily existence. The repetitive procedures, the mandatory quality checks, the standardized formats that sometimes seem unnecessarily rigid. These constraints exist not to make your work more difficult, but to ensure that the documentary system functions reliably. Despite being operated by fallible human beings, working under conditions that make perfect. Accuracy genuinely challenging, as you carefully erase the transposed digits and begin recopying the corrected calculation. The work takes on a different character. You are not simply transcribing information, but participating in a quality control process that has been refined over centuries to maximize accuracy while acknowledging human limitations. Your reed pen becomes an instrument in a larger system, designed to transform individual fallibility into collective reliability, personal routine into institutional memory, daily tedium into historical permanence. The final hieroglyph of your corrected text settles onto the papyrus with the same quiet finality that marks the end of countless similar documents. Tomorrow, you will begin again with fresh papyrus, newly mixed ink, and the familiar routine of copying information that may seem boring but serves functions that extend far beyond your individual understanding. And perhaps the most profound realization of all is this: the very boredom of your work hits repetitive, methodical. Undramatic character is precisely what makes possible the remarkable achievements of the civilization you serve through the patient accumulation of accurate records, one reed pen stroke at a time. You rise each morning in Memphis, the administrative capital of Egypt, not to the sound of trumpets announcing royal proclamations or the ceremonial chanting that accompanies religious festivals, but to the mundane clatter of wooden abacuses, being prepared for another day of calculating tax assessments. The year is 1279 BCE, early in the reign of Ramesses II, and you are a Menameba, mid-level administrator in the office of the vizier, responsible for overseeing the collection and distribution of grain throughout the Memphite nome. Your title, Overseer of Granary, accounts for the northern districts, carries considerable authority over the economic foundation of Egyptian civilization. Yet your daily existence consists almost entirely of reviewing numerical reports that document the movement of barley and emmer wheat through storage facilities you will never personally visit. The administrative building where you work represents one of the most sophisticated bureaucratic achievements in human history, though its architecture deliberately emphasizes function over grandeur. Unlike the temples that dominate Memphis's skyline with their soaring columns and elaborate decorative programs, your workplace consists of a series of rectangular rooms arranged around central courtyards that provide natural lighting for document work. The walls are built from mud brick rather than limestone, and the decorative elements are limited to simple geometric patterns that create visual interest without distracting from the serious business of governance. Your office occupies a space precisely calculated to accommodate the furniture and equipment necessary for administrative work while reflecting your position in the governmental hierarchy. Mid-level administrators like yourself receive rooms that are large enough for a wooden desk, several storage chests for document archives, and a small reception area where subordinates can report and receive instructions. Senior officials enjoy larger spaces with multiple rooms and private courtyards. Junior clerks work in communal areas where individual desks are arranged in rows that facilitate supervision while economizing on space. The daily routine begins before dawn with a process of preparation that transforms your personal living space into a professional workspace. The wooden chest containing your official seal, measuring devices, and calculation tools must be unlocked and its contents arranged according to procedures established by the vizier's office to ensure that all administrators throughout Egypt organize their work materials in identical fashion. This standardization serves multiple functions. It allows officials to work efficiently when visiting other offices, enables supervisors to conduct inspections quickly, and creates visual uniformity that reinforces the hierarchical discipline essential to large-scale administration. Your official seal, carved from green schist and bearing hieroglyphs that identify your specific administrative function, represents your personal authorization to approve grain transfers, validate storage reports, and certify tax collection records. The seal's physical security is your personal responsibility, and its loss would result in immediate suspension from office. While investigators determine whether the missing seal had been used to authorize fraudulent transactions, the procedures for seal security, detailed in administrative manuals that have been copied and recopied by scribes throughout Egypt, specify exactly how the seal must be stored, how its use must be documented, and how its integrity must be verified. Through periodic inspections, the calculation tools arranged on your desk include an abacus with wooden beads that slide along bronze rods, a set of measuring cups calibrated to standard Egyptian capacity units, and a collection of weights used to verify the accuracy of scales employed in granary operations. These tools require daily maintenance, cleaning the abacus beads to ensure smooth movement, checking the measuring cups for chips or cracks that could affect their accuracy, testing the weights against master standards to detect where that might compromise measurement precision, the mathematical procedures you employ to process grain reports involve calculations that appear straightforward but become complex when applied to the scale of operations required to feed millions of people, converting between different capacity measurements used in various regions of Egypt, adjusting storage totals to account for normal spoilage rates, calculating transportation costs based on distance and seasonal variations in shipping rates. These tasks require not just arithmetic competence, but detailed knowledge of standardized procedures that ensure consistency across the entire administrative system. Your first daily assignment involves reviewing overnight reports from granary superintendents throughout your administrative district. These documents, delivered by courier runners who maintain communication networks spanning hundreds of miles, contain numerical data that must be processed according to strict protocols established by central administrative offices. Each report follows an identical format: location, identification, storage facility, capacity, current inventory levels, recent additions and withdrawals, and projections for the coming 10-day period. The standardized format serves multiple functions that illustrate the sophisticated design of Egyptian administrative systems. First, it ensures that reports contain all information necessary for central planning while omitting irrelevant details that would complicate processing. Second, it enables rapid comparison between different facilities, making it possible to identify patterns and anomalies that might otherwise escape notice. Third, it facilitates delegation of work, since any trained administrator can process reports from any facility without requiring specialized knowledge of local conditions. As you work through the morning's reports, you encounter the kinds of minor discrepancies that reveal both the strengths and limitations of bureaucratic systems. A granary at Saqqara reports inventory levels that seem inconsistent with the previous week's figures, suggesting either calculation errors or undocumented transfers. A facility near Dashur shows spoilage rates significantly higher than normal, indicating possible problems with storage conditions or inventory management. A storehouse in the Fayum has requested authorization for repairs that would temporarily reduce storage capacity during the upcoming harvest season. Each discrepancy requires investigation through formal procedures that balance thorough evaluation against practical constraints on administrative time and resources. Minor inconsistencies can be resolved through written inquiries that request clarification from local officials. More serious problems may require dispatching inspectors to conduct on-site investigations. Major discrepancies that suggest fraud or incompetence could result in personnel reassignments, legal proceedings, or administrative reorganization. The decision-making process for handling these routine discrepancies illustrates how bureaucratic systems manage the tension between central control and operational flexibility. Local administrators possess detailed knowledge of conditions in their areas, but may lack broader perspective on system-wide patterns. Central offices have comprehensive overview, but may miss important local factors that affect interpretation of numerical data. The administrative procedures you follow attempt to combine these different types of knowledge while maintaining accountability through documentation that preserves records of decisions for future reference. Your morning work creates a steady stream of outgoing correspondence inquiries sent to local officials, reports forwarded to higher authorities, authorizations for routine transactions that fall within your approval limits. Each document follows standardized formats that have been refined through decades of administrative bar experience to include necessary information while minimizing the time required for composition and processing. The hieroglyphic formulas used for opening and closing official correspondence. The conventional phrases employed to request information or issue instructions. The numerical notation systems used for quantities and dates. These standardized elements allow administrators throughout Egypt to communicate efficiently despite the complexity of the governmental system. The physical production of this correspondence requires coordination between different specialists whose work must be precisely synchronized to maintain the flow of administrative communication. Scribes, who specialize in official correspondence, prepare draft documents according to your verbal instructions. But the final versions must be reviewed and approved by you personally before they can receive your official seal. Courier supervisors maintain schedules for document delivery that coordinate with your production timeline. But delays in document preparation can disrupt transportation arrangements that affect administrative operations throughout the region. As the morning progresses and the volume of correspondence increases, you begin to notice patterns in the routine problems that consume most of your administrative attention. Many of the discrepancies in granary reports result from timing differences between when transactions occur and when they are recorded in official documentation. Storage facilities may receive grain shipments on one day but not complete the paperwork until several days later, creating apparent inconsistencies that require investigation and resolution. Local officials may interpret administrative regulations differently, leading to variations in procedure that produce confusing results when viewed from central offices. These patterns reveal a fundamental characteristic of large-scale administrative systems. Much of the work involves managing the gap between the complex realities of operational activities and the simplified categories used in bureaucratic documentation. Grain storage involves hundreds of variables, weather conditions that affect spoilage rates, transportation problems that delay shipments, personnel issues that affect work efficiency, local political factors that influence cooperation with central directives. But administrative reports can capture only those aspects of these complex realities that can be reduced to standardized, numerical, and textual categories. The result is that administrators like you spend much of your time not simply processing information, but interpreting the relationship between documented data and operational realities. Your experience with similar reports from previous seasons allows you to distinguish between normal variations and genuinely problematic discrepancies. But this interpretive work requires forms of knowledge that cannot be reduced to formal procedures. The administrative system depends on your professional judgment. Yet that judgment must be exercised within bureaucratic constraints that limit your authority to deviate from established protocols. This tension between individual expertise and institutional standardization creates one of the most challenging aspects of your daily work. You often recognize problems that could be resolved through minor adjustments to standard procedures. But implementing such adjustments would require approvals from higher authorities whose decision-making timelines may not match operational needs. Conversely, you sometimes encounter situations where strict adherence to standard procedures would produce results that seem counterproductive. But your authority to exercise discretion is limited by accountability requirements that mandate documentation of any deviations from normal practice. As the sun reaches its zenith and the morning's correspondence nears completion, you prepare for the day's most demanding assignment: the weekly coordination meeting, where administrators from different functional areas collaborate to resolve issues that cross departmental boundaries. These meetings represent both the greatest strength and the most persistent weakness of Egyptian administrative systems. The commitment to comprehensive coordination that enables remarkable achievements in social organization, combined with the procedural complexity that makes even simple decisions, require extensive consultation and documentation. The approaching meeting will involve discussions of grain allocation priorities for the coming month. Resolution of transportation. Disputes that have delayed deliveries to several storage facilities, and planning for storage capacity modifications needed to accommodate the upcoming harvest. Each topic requires balancing competing demands and limited resources while maintaining the careful documentation that allows decisions to be implemented consistently throughout the administrative system. And as you gather the reports and calculations that will inform these discussions, you find yourself wondering whether the remarkable efficiency of Egyptian civilization justifies the grinding complexity of the administrative procedures that make such efficiency possible. The weekly coordination meeting convenes in the central conference chamber of the administrative complex, a room whose austere functionality reflects the serious nature of the work conducted within its walls. Unlike the decorated halls where pharaonic audiences and religious ceremonies take place, this space contains only the essential furniture required for bureaucratic collaboration: a large rectangular table crafted from Lebanese cedar, wooden stools arranged for 12 participants, wall niches containing reference documents, and writing surfaces positioned to facilitate the extensive note-taking that accompanies all formal administrative discussions. You take your designated seat according to the strict hierarchical protocols that govern all official meetings in Egyptian government. Seating arrangements reflect not only administrative rank, but also the functional relationships between different governmental departments, ensuring that officials who must coordinate regularly are positioned to communicate efficiently while maintaining the visual representation of authority that reinforces institutional discipline. Your position fourth seat on the northern side of the table identifies you as a mid-level administrator from the Granary Management Division with sufficient seniority to participate in policy discussions but insufficient rank to initiate agenda items. The meeting participants represent the functional diversity required to manage Egypt's agricultural economy. The senior official presiding over today's session is Keti, Deputy Overseer of the Northern Agricultural Districts, whose authority encompasses grain production, storage, and distribution throughout the Memphis region. To his right sits Senab, Administrator of Transportation Resources, responsible for coordinating the boat crews, pack animal trains, and human labor gangs that move agricultural products throughout Egypt. Across the table, Mary Care, Inspector of Granary Security, oversees the military personnel and civilian guards who protect stored grain from theft, spoilage, and administrative fraud. The remaining participants include specialists whose technical expertise supports the primary administrative functions. Amon Chotep-Wee, Keeper of Measurement Standards, who maintains the precision of weighing and measuring equipment used throughout the system. Kamewasa, Coordinator of Seasonal Labor, who manages the workforce assignments that staff granaries during harvest periods. And Tommy's, Recorder of Regional Statistics, who maintains the comprehensive databases that enable long-term planning. And policy evaluation, the formal opening of the meeting follows. Procedures established by royal decree and refined through decades of administrative experience. Keti begins by announcing the date according to both the civil calendar and the agricultural calendar, ensuring that all participants share identical temporal reference points for the decisions to be made. He then reviews the agenda items submitted by various departments, confirming the priority ranking that determines discussion, sequence, and time allocation. Finally, he authorizes the activation of official recording procedures, whereby designated scribes begin creating the permanent documentation that will preserve the meeting's proceedings for future reference. The first agenda item: dresses grain. Allocation priorities for the coming month, a topic that illustrates both the complexity of Egyptian economic planning and the collaborative, decision-making processes required to manage competing demands on limited resources. The fundamental challenge involves balancing multiple legitimate needs within storage capacity constraints that cannot be exceeded without risking catastrophic spoilage losses. MaryCare presents security requirements first, aligning the grain. Reserves that must be maintained in fortified storage facilities to support military operations and emergency food distribution. These strategic reserves represent insurance against military threats, natural disasters, and crop failures that could destabilize the entire Egyptian state. The quantities involved are substantially enough grain to feed the army for 6 months of campaigning, plus additional reserves for civilian populations in border areas that might face enemy attack or economic disruption. Senab follows with transportation considerations, describing the logistical constraints that affect grain movement throughout Egypt. River transport, dependent on Nile flood patterns and seasonal wind variations, can move large quantities efficiently, but only during limited time periods and along specific routes. Overland transport using pack animals and human carriers offers greater flexibility, but at much higher cost and with severe limitations on cargo capacity. The coordination of these different transportation methods requires advanced planning that must account for seasonal changes, infrastructure, maintenance, and competing demands from other governmental activities. Your own presentation focuses on storage facility management, detailing the current capacity utilization throughout your administrative district and projecting the modifications needed to accommodate harvest variations. The granaries under your supervision represent major investments in construction and maintenance, but their effectiveness depends on operational procedures that balance storage efficiency against accessibility requirements. Grain stored in the most secure facilities enjoys maximum protection against loss, but requires more complex procedures for authorized withdrawals. Conversely, grain kept in readily accessible storage can be distributed quickly when needed, but faces higher risks from theft, spoilage, and administrative error. The discussion that follows these presentations reveals the intricate interdependencies that characterize Egyptian administrative systems. Decisions about grain allocation affect transportation requirements, which influence security considerations, which impact storage procedures, which modify allocation possibilities. No single participant possesses sufficient knowledge to evaluate all relevant factors, yet the decisions that emerge from collaborative analysis must be implemented by individual administrators, whose success depends on their ability to coordinate effectively with colleagues from other departments. The collaborative decision-making process follows formal procedures, designed to ensure thorough consideration of all relevant factors while maintaining efficiency sufficient to meet operational deadlines. Each participant presents analysis from My Soleil, long-lasting color, sublime-lasting color, designed to ensure my last to Soleil, my lever Solet, my lay Soleil, my last, my less, my Celeste, my lay Celeste, my less, the recibi Salaz, it's my less, my li sapad, like I me so Celeste my mat. Das Glisika PKQ Salai also cricket I melits by Kited BIS I Kaposik Katus to blime back of where big sit way the tave then hit the bin with this gun the tight their functional perspective, but the presentations must address standardized questions that facilitate comparison and integration of different viewpoints. How will proposed allocation decisions affect your department's operational requirements? What alternative approaches might achieve similar results at lower cost or reduced risk? Which aspects of the proposed plan require modification to address problems identified through your specialized expertise? As the discussion progresses, you observe the subtle social dynamics that influence bureaucratic decision-making in ways that formal procedures cannot fully control. Personal relationships between administrators affect their willingness to accept compromises that might disadvantage their individual departments. Professional rivalries create incentives to identify problems with proposals advanced by competing officials. Shared experiences from previous coordination. Efforts generate trust or suspicion that influences current negotiations, yet these informal factors operate within institutional constraints that prevents personal considerations from dominating policy. Decisions. All recommendations must be supported by documented analysis that can withstand scrutiny from higher authorities. Proposed modifications must conform to regulatory standards that apply throughout the Egyptian administrative system. Final decisions require unanimous consent from all participants, ensuring that no major policy changes can be implemented without broad professional support. The grain allocation discussion gradually converges toward a consensus that reflects successful integration of multiple perspectives while acknowledging practical limitations on available options. Military reserve requirements will be satisfied through geographic distribution that reduces security risks while maintaining strategic accessibility. Transportation resources will be allocated to prioritize high-value shipments while accepting longer delivery times for routine transfers. Storage procedures will be modified to increase capacity utilization while maintaining quality control standards that prevent spoilage losses. The second major agenda item addresses transportation disputes that have disrupted grain deliveries. Throughout the region, problems that illustrate the challenge of maintaining operational efficiency when administrative systems must coordinate the activities of thousands of individual workers across vast geographic distances. The disputes involve conflicts between different groups competing for limited transportation resources, disagreements over compensation rates for various types of cargo handling, and jurisdictional questions about authority relationships between central administrators and local supervisors. Senab presents a comprehensive analysis of the transportation problems, documenting incidents that have occurred over the past month and identifying patterns that suggest underlying systemic issues rather than isolated operational failures. Boat crews operating on different sections of the Nile have adopted loading procedures that create delays when cargo must be transferred between vessels. Pack animal supervisors in various districts have interpreted compensation regulations differently, leading to wage disputes that have disrupted caravan schedules. Human labor gangs assigned to different administrative jurisdictions have conflicting instructions about work priorities that create confusion when multiple projects compete for the same personnel. The root cause of many disputes, Senab explains, lies in the gap between the standardized procedures prescribed by central administrative offices and the variable conditions that characterize actual transportation operations. Standard procedures assume consistent weather patterns, uniform infrastructure quality, and stable personnel assignments. But real transportation operations must adapt to seasonal changes in river levels, variations in road maintenance, and fluctuations in worker availability that require constant adjustment to operational plans. The discussion of transportation disputes becomes a broader examination of the tension between administrative standardization and operational flexibility that characterizes all complex organizational systems. Standardized procedures enable coordination between different parts of the bureaucracy and ensure accountability through consistent documentation requirements. But excessive standardization can reduce the ability to respond effectively to local conditions that vary significantly across Egypt's diverse geographic and economic environments. Kamwaset contributes analysis of workforce management issues that complicate transportation operations, describing the seasonal patterns of labor availability that affect all aspects of agricultural administration. During harvest periods, most available workers are committed to agricultural activities that cannot be postponed without risking crop losses. During flood seasons, agricultural work becomes impossible, but transportation operations face different Challenges from high water levels and storm conditions that disrupt normal schedules. The coordination of transportation activities with agricultural labor patterns requires advanced planning that must account for regional variations in harvest, timing, local customs affecting work organization, and individual worker preferences that influence recruitment and retention. The administrative procedures for workforce coordination have evolved through trial and error over decades, but they require constant refinement as economic conditions change and new operational challenges emerge. Mary Care's contribution focuses on security considerations that add additional complexity to transportation coordination. Grain shipments represent valuable cargo that attracts theft attempts, requiring protective measures that increase transportation costs and operational complexity. Security procedures must balance protection against criminal activity with efficiency. Requirements that minimize delays and additional expenses. The coordination of security personnel with transportation crews requires advanced planning and ongoing communication that adds another layer of administrative complexity to already challenging logistics operations. As the transportation discussion continues through the afternoon, you begin to appreciate the remarkable scope of coordination required to maintain Egypt's economic systems. The grain allocation and transportation decisions being made in this conference room will affect the daily activities of thousands of workers throughout the region. Farmers delivering harvest to local collection points, boat crews loading cargo for transport to Memphis, granary workers receiving shipments and updating inventory records, guards protecting storage facilities, administrators processing transaction documentation. All these activities must be coordinated through the administrative procedures being refined in your ongoing discussions. Yet the coordination occurs through documentary systems that create inevitable delays between decision-making and implementation, gaps between central planning and operational adaptation, misunderstandings between different levels of bureaucratic hierarchy. The remarkable achievement of Egyptian civilization lies not in eliminating these coordination challenges, but in developing administrative procedures sophisticated enough to manage them effectively while maintaining the overall system performance that enables Egypt to support millions of people through organized economic activity. As the afternoon light begins to fade and the meeting approaches its scheduled conclusion, you prepare for the most demanding phase of the coordination process, the formal documentation of decisions that will guide implementation activities throughout the administrative system. The agreements reached through collaborative discussion must be translated into specific operational instructions that can be communicated clearly to local administrators and implemented consistently across diverse organizational environments. But before the documentation phase can begin, one final agenda item requires attention: planning for storage capacity modifications needed to accommodate the upcoming harvest. This discussion will determine construction priorities that affect next year's operational capabilities, infrastructure investments that will influence Egyptian economic performance for decades, and policy decisions that reflect the long-term strategic thinking that distinguishes successful civilizations from those that merely respond to immediate challenges. The final agenda item of your coordination meeting addresses strategic planning for storage infrastructure improvements, a topic that reveals the most sophisticated aspects of Egyptian administrative thinking while highlighting the enormous complexity of managing a civilization that must anticipate needs decades into the future. Unlike the operational problems that dominated earlier discussions, grain allocation priorities and transportation disputes that require immediate resolution infrastructure planning involves decisions whose consequences will unfold gradually over years and decades, creating challenges that test the limits of bureaucratic foresight and analytical capability. PTAHMES begins the discussion by presenting statistical analyses that document long-term trends in agricultural production throughout the Memphis region. data that has been accumulated through decades of meticulous record-keeping by scribes whose daily work creates the information foundation for strategic decision-making. The numerical patterns that emerge from this historical data reveal gradual changes in Egypt's economic environment that individual administrators might not notice through direct observation, but become clearly apparent when viewed through comprehensive TIT. Statistical analysis, agricultural productivity has increased steadily over the past 20 years, reflecting improvements in irrigation systems, refinements in cultivation techniques, and expansion of farmland through drainage projects in the Delta region. But this increased production has created storage capacity requirements that strain existing granary infrastructure throughout northern Egypt. The existing storage facilities, constructed during earlier periods when production levels were lower, cannot accommodate current harvest yields without dangerously high utilization rates that increase spoilage risks and reduce operational flexibility. Population growth in urban areas around Memphis has created additional demand for stored grain that must be maintained year-round to ensure food security for non-agricultural workers whose specialized skills contribute to Egypt's economic prosperity, but who depend on agricultural surpluses for their daily subsistence. The craftsmen who produce the luxury goods traded throughout the Mediterranean world. The scribes who maintain administrative systems that coordinate economic activity. The soldiers who protect Egypt's borders and maintain internal security. These essential workers require reliable food supplies that must be stored and distributed through increasingly complex logistical systems. The geographic distribution of storage capacity presents another layer of strategic complexity that must be addressed through careful infrastructure planning. Current granary facilities are concentrated in locations that were optimal when constructed, but may no longer represent the most efficient configuration for serving Egypt's evolving economic geography. Urban growth has altered transportation patterns, making some existing facilities less accessible while creating new distribution requirements in previously undeveloped areas. Military strategic considerations add yet another dimension to storage planning that must be integrated with economic and logistical factors. Grain reserves must be positioned to support military operations in border areas while remaining secure against enemy attack or internal rebellion. The storage facilities that serve these strategic functions require different design characteristics than those optimized for economic efficiency, creating planning challenges that require balancing competing objectives. Through careful analysis of multiple scenarios, Kedi presents the Vizier's preliminary directives for infrastructure development, outlining the strategic priorities that will guide planning decisions throughout Egypt during the next 5 years. The royal administration has authorized major investments in storage capacity expansion, but the available resources require careful allocation among competing regional needs and functional requirements. The planning process must identify optimal locations for new facilities, determine appropriate capacity and design specifications for different operational environments, and coordinate construction schedules with agricultural cycles that affect both workforce availability and material supply logistics. The discussion of infrastructure planning reveals fundamental questions about the relationship between present costs and future benefits that characterize all long-term strategic decision-making. Storage facility construction requires substantial, immediate investments in materials, labor, and organizational resources that could alternatively be used for other governmental purposes. Military campaigns that could expand Egypt's territorial control and tribute income. Temple construction projects that maintain religious legitimacy and cultural prestige. Public works programs that improve transportation, infrastructure, and irrigation. Systems. All these competing priorities have legitimate claims on available resources. The analytical framework used to evaluate these competing priorities reflects sophisticated understanding of economic relationships that extends far beyond simple cost-benefit calculation. Storage capacity investments generate benefits that accrue gradually over many years through increased agricultural productivity, reduced spoilage losses, improved food security, and enhanced flexibility for responding to economic disruptions. But these benefits are difficult to quantify precisely and may not become fully apparent till long after the initial investment. Decisions have been made. Your contribution to the planning discussion focuses on operational considerations that must be incorporated into facility design specifications to ensure that new storage infrastructure will function effectively within existing administrative systems. The granary facilities you currently supervise have revealed practical problems that result from inadequate attention to operational requirements during the original construction planning. Storage chambers that are difficult to access during peak utilization periods. Ventilation systems that prove inadequate under certain weather conditions. Security features that interfere with routine operations. These design flaws create ongoing operational challenges that reduce facility effectiveness while increasing administrative costs. The integration of new storage facilities with existing transportation infrastructure presents additional challenges that require careful coordination between different governmental departments. New granaries must be positioned to take advantage of existing river transport capabilities while avoiding locations that would create bottlenecks during peak harvest periods. Road connections must be adequate to support the heavy cargo traffic that storage operations generate. But road construction and maintenance represent additional infrastructure investments that must be factored into overall planning calculations. CENOB contributes analysis of transportation network optimization that illustrates the complex interdependencies between different aspects of infrastructure planning. Storage facilities located to minimize transportation costs for agricultural producers may not be optimally positioned for distribution to urban consumers. Facilities that provide convenient access for routine operations may be vulnerable to disruption from flooding, military attack, or civil disorder. The planning challenge involves finding solutions that balance multiple objectives, while acknowledging that optimal solutions for individual factors may be incompatible when considered within broader systemic requirements. The technical specifications for storage facility design reflect accumulated knowledge from centuries of Egyptian experience with large-scale grain storage, combined with recent innovations that address problems identified through operational analysis of existing facilities. Construction materials must provide adequate protection against moisture, pests, and temperature fluctuations while remaining economically feasible, given available resources and transportation constraints. Architectural configurations must balance storage capacity against accessibility requirements, security needs against operational efficiency, durability standards against construction costs. Amenhotep I presents detailed specifications for measurement and quality control systems that must be integrated into new storage facilities to ensure compatibility with administrative procedures used throughout Egypt. The measuring devices, weighing equipment, and sampling procedures employed in different granaries must conform to standardized specifications that enable accurate comparison of data collected at various locations. But these standardization requirements must be balanced against local conditions that may require modifications to standard procedures. The workforce requirements for constructing and operating new storage facilities create additional planning challenges that must be coordinated with other governmental activities competing for skilled labor. Construction projects require craftsmen, engineers, and supervisors whose expertise is also needed for temple construction, military fortification, and urban development projects throughout Egypt. The scheduling of construction activities must account for seasonal variations in worker availability. Agricultural labor demands that compete for the same personnel, and training requirements for specialized skills needed for granary operations as the planning discussion progresses through the afternoon. The scope of coordination required becomes increasingly apparent. The storage infrastructure decisions being made in this conference room will affect administrative operations throughout northern Egypt for decades. The facilities constructed according to current plans will influence agricultural development. Patterns, urban growth configurations, transportation network evolution, and military strategic capabilities in ways that extend far beyond their immediate function of grain storage. Yet these far-reaching consequences must be anticipated and planned for through administrative procedures that operate within inherent limitations on bureaucratic foresight and analytical capability. The statistical data that informs planning decisions reflects past trends that may not continue unchanged into the future. The economic assumptions underlying cost-benefit analyses may prove inaccurate when tested against changing political and environmental conditions. The coordination requirements that appear manageable during the planning phase may prove more complex when implementation must occur within the constraints of ongoing operational activities. The final phase of the meeting involves translating the strategic planning decisions into specific operational instructions that will guide implementation activities throughout the administrative system. The agreements reached through collaborative analysis must be documented in standardized formats that can be communicated clearly to local administrators, construction supervisors, and facility operators whose successful coordination will determine whether the planning objectives are achieved. The documentation process requires extraordinary precision in language and numerical specification, since ambiguities or errors in the planning documents could propagate through the implementation system to create operational problems that might not become apparent until construction is complete and facilities begin operations. The administrative procedures for strategic planning have been refined through experience with previous infrastructure projects. But each new planning cycle reveals additional complexities that require further refinement of coordination mechanisms. As the sun sets over Memphis and oil lamps are lit throughout the administrative complex to illuminate the evening's documentation work, you reflect on the remarkable sophistication of the governmental systems that make Egyptian civilization possible. The strategic planning discussions that occupied your afternoon represent analytical capabilities that exceed anything available to individual decision-makers. Yet these capabilities exist only through institutional procedures that coordinate the specialized knowledge of dozens of administrators whose individual expertise covers different aspects of the complex problems being addressed, the decisions emerging from today's coordination. Meeting will influence the daily lives of hundreds of thousands of people throughout northern Egypt. Yet most of those affected will never be aware of the administrative processes that shape their economic environment. The farmers who deliver grain to new collection facilities, the workers who construct storage infrastructure, the urban consumers who benefit from improved food security, all these individuals will experience the consequences of today's planning decisions without understanding the bureaucratic systems that make such long-term coordination possible. And perhaps this represents the most profound achievement of Egyptian administrative systems: their ability to coordinate complex activities across vast scales of time and space while operating through routine procedures that appear mundane to their individual participants. The grinding daily work of calculation, documentation, and coordination, boring as it may seem to those who perform it, creates institutional capabilities that transcend anything possible through individual action or informal social organization, making possible the agricultural productivity, urban development, and cultural achievements that define one of history's most successful civilizations. You wake each morning before dawn to the sound of wooden mallets striking bronze chisels, a rhythmic percussion that echoes across the Giza plateau like the heartbeat of a civilization transforming itself through the patient accumulation of precisely cut limestone blocks. The year is 2580 BCE, during the fourth year of construction on what will someday be known as the Great Pyramid. And you are Senebna to name that will survive in any royal inscription or temple relief, but simply one, of approximately 10,000 workers whose daily labor shapes each stone that rises toward the heavens. One careful blow at a time. Your sleeping quarters occupy a section of the workers' village that archaeological excavations will someday reveal as one of the most carefully planned residential developments in human history. The mud brick structures that house pyramid construction crews reflect the same attention to efficient organization that characterizes every aspect of this massive project. Your dormitory room, shared with 7 other stonemasons, measures exactly 12 by 8 cubits dimensions, calculated to provide adequate personal space while maximizing the number of workers who can be housed within the available construction area. The village infrastructure demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the logistical requirements for maintaining a permanent workforce of unprecedented size. Communal kitchens equipped with bread ovens, beer brewing facilities, and large-scale food storage areas provide daily meals for thousands of workers whose caloric requirements exceed those of typical agricultural laborers. The physical demands of stone cutting, block transportation, and precision placement require substantial nutritional support that the project administration provides through organized food production systems that operate with industrial efficiency. Your daily food allocation, carefully calculated by administrative scribes who track consumption patterns and work output throughout the construction site, includes 2 loaves of bread baked from emmer wheat, a portion of dried fish or meat, vegetables grown in gardens maintained specifically for the pyramid workforce, and 3 measures of beer whose modest alcohol content provides both hydration and calories necessary for sustained physical labor. This nutritional program is documented in administrative records that survive to demonstrate the project's organizational sophistication. Represents one of the earliest examples of systematic workforce management based on empirical analysis of labor requirements, the wake-up call that begins each workday, the sound of mallets and chisels that serves as your alarm clock for lects, the carefully coordinated timing that governs every aspect of pyramid construction. Work begins before sunrise to take advantage of cooler temperatures that make stone cutting more tolerable and reduce the risk of heat exhaustion that could disable valuable skilled workers. The construction schedule operates on 10-day work cycles followed by 2 rest days, a pattern that provides adequate recovery time while maintaining consistent progress toward completion targets. Established by royal decree, your assignment as a stonemason places you within the skilled craftsman category that forms the technical backbone of pyramid construction. Workers whose specialized knowledge transforms raw limestone quarried from the Giza Plateau into precisely shaped building blocks that fit together with mathematical precision. This work requires expertise developed through years of apprenticeship. Training that cannot be replaced by unskilled labor, no matter how numerous or enthusiastic. The project's success depends absolutely on maintaining an adequate supply of skilled workers, whose technical capabilities enable the engineering achievements that distinguish Egyptian pyramid construction from the simpler monument building attempted by other ancient civilizations. The tools arranged beside your sleeping mat represent the technological foundation that makes pyramid construction possible. Bronze chisels in various sizes for different aspects of stone shaping. Wooden mallets designed to deliver precise force without damaging delicate cutting edges. Copper saws for creating straight cuts through limestone blocks. Measuring devices that ensure dimensional accuracy, and marking tools for laying out cutting patterns according to specifications provided by master craftsmen, who coordinate work throughout the construction site. The bronze chisels require daily maintenance that reflects the precision demanded by pyramid construction standards. Each cutting edge must be sharpened to exact specifications that balance durability against cutting effectiveness, since tools that are too sharp break easily under the force required to cut limestone, while tools that are too dull require excessive force that reduces cutting accuracy and increases worker fatigue. The technique for achieving optimal tool sharpness has been developed through generations of Egyptian stoneworking experience. But it must be applied consistently by individual workers whose skill with tool maintenance directly affects their productivity and the quality of their work output. The measuring devices you employ include wooden rulers marked with standardized Egyptian units, bronze squares for checking right angles, plumb lines for verifying vertical surfaces, and string lines for laying out horizontal cutting patterns. These tools must be calibrated against master standards maintained by supervisory craftsmen to ensure that blocks cut by different workers will fit together properly when assembled into the pyramid structure. The dimensional tolerances required for successful pyramid construction are far more precise than those needed for typical building projects, creating quality control challenges that require systematic verification procedures throughout the production process. Your first task each morning involves reviewing the day's work assignment provided by the master mason responsible for coordinating stone cutting operations within your work gang. Today's assignment specifies the production of 12 limestone blocks with dimensions of 2 by 1 by 1 cubit, shaped according to standardized patterns that enable these blocks to fit into specific positions within the pyramid's internal structure. The blocks must meet exact dimensional requirements while maintaining surface quality standards that ensure proper contact between adjacent stones in the final assembly. The limestone you work with comes from quarries located approximately half a mile south of the pyramid construction site, extracted by specialized quarry workers who remove stone from geological formations, using techniques that minimize fractures and defects that would make blocks unsuitable for construction use. The quarrying process itself represents a major logistical operation that must be coordinated with stone cutting schedules to ensure that adequate supplies of raw material remain available, while avoiding accumulation of excess inventory that would interfere with construction site organization. The transportation of limestone blocks from quarry to construction site involves another specialized workforce that operates wooden rollers, rope and pulley systems, and human labor gangs that move multi-ton blocks across terrain that must be maintained in condition suitable for heavy cargo transport. The coordination of quarrying, transportation, and stone cutting operations requires sophisticated planning that anticipates material flow requirements while accommodating the seasonal variations that affect worker availability and site accessibility. As you begin the day's stone cutting work, the physical demands become immediately apparent in ways that will leave permanent marks on your skeletal structure for future archaeologists to analyze. The posture required for precise stone cutting, kneeling or crouching with your spine curved to bring your head and hands close to the work surface, creates chronic stress on your lower back, hip joints, and knees that accumulates over months and years of daily repetition. The repetitive hammering motions required to drive chisels through limestone generate impact forces that create distinctive wear patterns on your right shoulder, elbow, and wrist joints. The dust generated by stone cutting operations creates respiratory challenges that affect all workers involved in pyramid construction, though the long-term health consequences will not become apparent until years after the project's completion. Limestone dust, suspended in air that circulates through the construction site, creates a constant, fine particulate environment that workers inhale throughout their shifts. The project administration has not yet developed understanding of occupational health hazards, so no protective measures exist beyond the natural respiration filtering provided by cloth head coverings worn for sun protection. The precision required for pyramid construction demands sustained concentration that makes stone cutting work mentally exhausting as well as physically demanding. Each chisel blow must be placed with careful accuracy to achieve the dimensional specifications required for proper fit within the pyramid structure. Errors in stone cutting cannot always be corrected through reworking, and blocks that fail to meet quality standards must be discarded, representing wasted labor and materials that affect overall project efficiency. the quality control procedures. Governing your work involve multiple levels of inspection that reflect the critical importance of dimensional accuracy for pyramid structural integrity. Your immediate supervisor, a master craftsman with decades of stone cutting experience, examines each completed block using standardized measuring devices to verify compliance with specification requirements. Blocks that pass initial inspection are marked with hieroglyphic symbols that identify the work gang responsible for their production and transported to staging areas, where they await final assembly. The social organization within your work gang reflects hierarchical structures that balance technical expertise with administrative authority. The master craftsman who supervises your team possesses superior technical knowledge that enables him to solve complex cutting problems and maintain quality standards. But he reports to administrative officials whose broader planning responsibilities require understanding of coordination requirements that extend beyond individual work gang activities. The relationships between skilled craftsmen, like yourself, and the various categories of supporting workers illustrate the complex labor organization required for pyramid construction. Apprentice stonemasons assigned to your work gang for training purposes provide assistance with routine tasks while learning the technical skills necessary for advancement to full craftsman status. General laborers recruited from agricultural workers during flood seasons when farming becomes impossible perform the heavy lifting and material handling that supports skilled craftsmen's productivity. As the morning progresses and the limestone blocks take shape under your careful attention, you become aware of participating in an achievement that extends far beyond the immediate construction project. The mathematical precision demanded by pyramid construction requires technical capabilities that push Egyptian civilization toward new levels of engineering sophistication. The organizational systems needed to coordinate thousands of workers represent administrative innovations that will influence Egyptian governmental development for centuries. The massive scale of resource mobilization demonstrates state capacity that establishes Egypt's position as the dominant power in the ancient world. Yet these broad historical consequences remain largely invisible to individual workers whose daily experience consists primarily of repetitive physical labor under challenging environmental conditions. The limestone dust, the physical discomfort, the mental concentration required for precision work, the social tensions that arise when thousands of people work together under hierarchical supervision. These immediate realities shape your daily existence in ways that seem far removed from the civilizational achievements that pyramid construction represents. The midday break provides temporary relief from the physical demands of stone cutting while highlighting the logistical complexity required to maintain workforce efficiency. The food distribution system that provides meals for 10,000 workers operates with military-like precision, serving standardized portions according to schedules that minimize disruption to work activities, while ensuring adequate nutrition for sustained physical labor. The break periods are calculated to optimize the balance between worker recovery and construction progress, reflecting empirical understanding of human performance limitations that will not be systematically studied by other civilizations for thousands of years as you rest in whatever shade you can find on the sun-baked Giza Plateau, surrounded by the sounds of ongoing construction activity that never completely ceases. You contemplate the strange paradox of your daily existence. You are participating in the creation of one of the most remarkable architectural achievements in human history. Yet your individual contribution consists almost entirely of repetitive, manual labor that will be forgotten as soon as the project reaches completion. The precision and dedication you bring to stone cutting work is essential for pyramid construction success. But your personal identity remains invisible within the vast organizational system that makes such massive construction projects possible. And as the bronze gong sounds the end of the midday break and you return to your position beside partially completed limestone blocks, You begin to wonder whether the grinding routine of daily labor, boring and physically demanding as it may seem, represents not just a necessary burden to be endured, but the fundamental process through which human civilizations transform ambitious dreams into permanent achievements, one carefully shaped stone at a time. The afternoon shift begins with a systematic reorganization of work areas that transforms the construction site from the scattered activity of individual stone, cutting into the coordinated precision of large-scale assembly operations. The limestone blocks completed during the morning session must be transported from cutting areas to staging zones where master craftsmen inspect final dimensions and mark pieces according to their designated positions within the pyramid structure. This transition from production to logistics represents one of the most complex operational challenges in pyramid construction, requiring coordination between hundreds of workers whose specialized functions must mesh perfectly to maintain construction. Progress. Your role in the afternoon assembly operations involves joining a transportation crew responsible for moving finished limestone blocks from cutting areas to the pyramid's rising structure. This work requires different physical skills than stone cutting, less precision, but more raw strength, less individual craftsmanship, but more teamwork, less technical knowledge, but more stamina for sustained heavy labor. The transition between morning cutting work and afternoon transportation duties reflects the project's efficient use of skilled workers. Its capabilities exceed the requirements of any single specialized function. The transportation technology employed for moving massive limestone blocks represents the cutting edge of Egyptian engineering innovation. Systems developed specifically to address the unprecedented challenges of pyramid construction logistics. Wooden rollers, crafted from imported cedar logs and maintained by specialized carpenters, provide the foundation for ground transport systems that can move blocks, weighing several tons across the irregular terrain of the construction site. Rope and pulley arrangements, using plant fiber cordage, whose strength characteristics have been empirically tested under construction conditions, enable controlled movement of heavy loads with manageable human effort. The human organization required for block transportation involves crew assignments that balance individual worker capabilities against collective strength requirements. Your transportation crew consists of 12 workers arranged in specific positions that optimize force application, while minimizing safety risks from uncontrolled block movement. The crew leader, a supervisor with extensive experience in heavy lifting operations, coordinates individual efforts through verbal commands and receives hand signals that ensure synchronized effort during critical movement phases. The coordination of transportation. Crews throughout the construction site requires planning sophistication that anticipates material flow requirements while avoiding traffic conflicts that could disrupt construction schedules. Multiple crews operating simultaneously must follow designated transportation routes that minimize interference with ongoing stone cutting operations. Quarrying activities and completed pyramid areas where workers are installing blocks according to precise architectural specifications. The traffic management system governing construction site movement represents one of the earliest examples of systematic logistics coordination in human history. As your crew approaches the first limestone block scheduled for afternoon transportation, the magnitude of the physical challenge becomes immediately apparent. The block measures 2 cubits in length, 1 cubit in width, and 1 cubit in height, dimensions that represent approximately 2,300 pounds of precisely cut limestone that must be moved without damage to its carefully shaped surfaces. The block's weight exceeds the carrying capacity of your 12-person crew, requiring mechanical assistance through rope and pulley systems that multiply human effort, while demanding careful coordination to prevent accidents that could injure workers or damage materials. The process of preparing blocks for transportation involves positioning wooden rollers, attaching rope rigging, and organizing crew members according to standardized procedures that have been developed through experience. With thousands of similar operations, Each step must be completed according to established protocols that balance efficiency against safety considerations. Since injuries to skilled workers create production delays that affect the entire construction schedule, the transportation procedures reflect accumulated knowledge about safe lifting practices that will not be systematically understood by other civilizations for millennia. The physical experience of moving massive limestone blocks provides direct contact with the engineering principles that make pyramid construction possible. The force required to overcome static friction and initiate block movement demands coordinated effort that tests the limits of human strength even when supplemented by mechanical advantage systems. The careful control needed to guide block movement along predetermined paths requires sustained attention that makes transportation work mentally demanding despite its apparently simple nature. The route your crew follows from the stone cutting area to the pyramid structure traverses terrain that has been modified specifically to facilitate heavy cargo transport. Wooden roadways constructed from planking laid over leveled earth foundations provide stable surfaces that prevent rollers from sinking into soft ground during block movement. These temporary roads represent major construction projects in themselves, requiring substantial material investments and ongoing maintenance to remain functional throughout the multi-decade pyramid construction period. The staging areas where completed blocks await final installation demonstrate sophisticated inventory management systems that track individual pieces through complex assembly processes. Each block receives identification markings that specify its intended position within the pyramid structure, ensuring that pieces cut to precise dimensional requirements will be installed in locations where those specifications are necessary for structural integrity. The inventory system must accommodate thousands of individual blocks while providing rapid access to specific pieces when installation schedules require them. Your transportation crew's destination for this afternoon's first block involves a staging area located approximately halfway up the pyramid's current height, requiring movement along wooden ramps, whose engineering represents some of the most innovative problem-solving in pyramid construction. The ramps must provide gradual inclines that allow heavy blocks to be moved upward using available human and mechanical power, while remaining structurally stable under the tremendous loads that transportation operations impose. The ramp construction itself represents a major engineering project that must be continuously modified as pyramid construction progresses upward. The ramps must be extended and reconfigured to provide access to higher levels of the pyramid structure, while previous ramp sections must be dismantled to avoid interfering with completed pyramid surfaces. The coordination of ramp construction with ongoing pyramid assembly creates complex scheduling challenges that require advanced planning and flexible adaptation to unexpected problems. As your crew begins the gradual ascent up the wooden ramp, the physical demands of pyramid construction become even more apparent. The combination of heavy lifting, inclined movement, careful control required to prevent block damage creates sustained exertion that tests the limits of human endurance. The work must be performed under direct sunlight that heats limestone surfaces to temperatures that burn exposed skin, while limestone dust creates respiratory challenges that accumulate throughout long work shifts. The social dynamics within your transportation crew reflect hierarchical relationships that balance individual worker capabilities with collective performance requirements. The crew leader maintains authority through technical expertise and experience that enable him to solve problems and coordinate team efforts effectively. But his authority depends on crew members' willingness to follow instructions and cooperate during physically demanding operations. The relationships that develop among crew members combine professional cooperation with personal friendships that make difficult work more tolerable. The coordination between different transportation crews operating simultaneously on various parts of the pyramid structure requires communication, systems that enable rapid information sharing while avoiding confusion that could create safety hazards. Horn signals, flag displays, and messenger systems provide means for supervisory personnel to coordinate crew activities and respond to problems that require immediate attention. These communication systems represent early examples of the signaling. Technologies that enable complex organizational coordination, the precision required for block placement during final. Installation operations demands technical skills that exceed those needed for transportation activities. Master craftsmen who specialize in pyramid assembly use measuring devices, alignment tools, and positioning techniques that achieve dimensional accuracies measured in fractions of inches. Despite working with multi-ton limestone blocks, the installation process requires careful integration of individual blocks into larger structural patterns that distribute weight loads and maintain pyramid stability. Your crew's role during installation operations involves providing controlled movement and positioning support that enables master craftsmen to achieve precise block placement without risking damage to completed pyramid surfaces. This support work requires understanding of lifting and positioning techniques that complement the technical expertise of assembly specialists while maintaining safety standards that protect both workers and construction materials. The collaboration between transportation crews and installation craftsmen illustrates the specialization and coordination that characterize all aspects of pyramid construction. As the afternoon progresses and your crew completes transportation assignments for multiple limestone blocks, you develop appreciation for the remarkable logistics achievements that pyramid construction represents. The coordination of quarrying, cutting, transportation, and installation operations involves thousands of individual workers whose specialized activities must be synchronized to maintain consistent construction progress. The material flow systems that move massive quantities of limestone from quarries to final positions within the pyramid structure demonstrate organizational capabilities that will not be matched by other civilizations for centuries. The administrative systems that track construction progress and resource utilization operate through documentation procedures that record block production, transportation activities, and installation completion according to standardized formats that enable project management and quality control throughout the massive construction effort. Scribes who specialize in construction record keeping maintain detailed logs that track individual worker productivity, material consumption rates, and technical problems that require supervisory attention. The seasonal variations that affect pyramid construction create additional logistics challenges that must be accommodated through flexible planning and resource management systems. During flood periods when agricultural work becomes impossible, the available workforce expands dramatically as farmers join construction crews, requiring temporary expansion of housing, food production, and work coordination systems. During harvest seasons, agricultural labor demands reduced construction workforce availability, requiring adjustment of construction schedules and work priorities. As evening approaches and the bronze gongs signal the end of the afternoon work shift, you contemplate the strange temporal perspective that pyramid construction creates for its participants. The daily routine of stone cutting, transportation, and installation work appears repetitive and mundane when viewed from the perspective of individual shifts. But these routine activities accumulate over months and years into architectural achievements that will endure for millennia. The pyramid rising gradually on the Giza Plateau represents not just monumental architecture, but a testament to the organizing capabilities of Egyptian civilization. The technical innovations that emerge when large-scale projects push human capabilities toward new limits, and the social coordination that makes possible achievements exceeding anything accessible to individual effort. Yet these broad historical significance remains largely invisible to the individual workers whose daily experience consists primarily of physical labor, logistics coordination, and technical problem-solving under challenging environmental conditions. And as you return to the workers' village for the evening meal and rest period that will prepare you for tomorrow's continuation of the same routine activities, You begin to understand that the most remarkable aspect of pyramid construction may not be its architectural grandeur or engineering sophistication, but its demonstration that extraordinary achievements become possible when ordinary people commit themselves to sustained effort guided by systematic organization, patient accumulation of incremental progress, and collective dedication to goals that extend far beyond any individual lifetime. The evening routine in the workers' village provides respite from the physical demands of construction labor, while highlighting the social complexity of maintaining a permanent community dedicated to a single massive project that will require decades to complete. The communal areas where you gather with your fellow workers create temporary spaces of relaxation and social interaction that contrast sharply with the hierarchical discipline that governs daytime construction activities. Yet even these informal social gatherings reflect the underlying organizational requirements of pyramid construction. Since the relationships formed during evening hours affect workplace cooperation and productivity during the following days. Labor. The evening meal, served in communal dining areas that accommodate hundreds of workers simultaneously, consists of foods prepared specifically to support the nutritional requirements of sustained heavy labor. The bread, baked from emmer wheat in ovens designed for large-scale production, provides carbohydrates necessary for physical energy. The beer brewed according to recipes that balance alcohol content against hydration needs, supplies calories, while avoiding intoxication that could impair workplace safety. The occasional meat or fish supplements the primarily vegetarian diet with proteins, necessary for muscle maintenance and recovery from daily physical exertion. The food production systems that supply meals for 10,000 construction workers represent logistical achievements that parallel the engineering innovations of pyramid construction itself. The agricultural estates designated to supply construction provisions must coordinate planting, harvesting, and processing schedules with construction labor requirements. The transportation networks that bring food supplies to the Giza Plateau must operate efficiently despite competing demands from other governmental activities throughout Egypt. The storage and distribution systems that manage food inventory must prevent spoilage while ensuring adequate supplies during seasonal variations and availability. As you share the evening meal with workers from your transportation crew and stone-cutting gang, the conversations that develop reveal perspectives on pyramid construction that differ significantly from the official narratives preserved in royal inscriptions and temple reliefs. Your colleagues express pride in their contribution to an architectural achievement of unprecedented scale, but they also discuss the physical hardships, family separations, and economic sacrifices that participation in the project requires. These informal discussions create social bonds that help workers cope with the challenges of construction labor while providing unofficial channels for communication that supplement formal supervisory relationships. The workers seated around you represent the demographic diversity of pyramid construction labor. Individuals recruited from throughout Egypt and beyond to provide the specialized skills and general pige and labor necessary for successful project completion. Skilled stonemasons like yourself typically come from traditional craft families with generations of experience in construction techniques. But many construction workers are agricultural laborers whose participation in pyramid construction provides seasonal employment when farming activities are impossible due to Nile flood conditions. The geographic origins of construction workers create cultural diversity within the workers' village that requires ongoing social negotiation and adaptation. Workers from Upper Egypt bring different dialect variations, religious customs, and work traditions that must be integrated with the practices of workers from the Delta region, the Fayum, and neighboring countries. The administrative systems governing construction workers must accommodate this cultural diversity while maintaining the standardization necessary for effective coordination of complex technical activities. The temporary nature of construction employment creates economic relationships that affect workers, families, and home communities in ways that extend far beyond the immediate construction project. Workers who commit to pyramid construction must make arrangements for agricultural responsibilities, family care, and economic obligations that continue during their absence from home villages. The compensation provided by pyramid construction, employment, food, housing, and payment in goods must be sufficient to support both workers and their dependents, while providing incentives for skilled workers to remain with the project. Despite opportunities for employment in other construction activities throughout Egypt, the social hierarchies that govern workers' village organization reflect broader Egyptian social structures while creating unique relationships specific to the construction environment. Craftsmen possess technical authority based on specialized knowledge and experience, but their status within the village depends also on their ability to maintain productive relationships with workers under their supervision. Administrative officials who coordinate construction logistics possess bureaucratic authority that enables them to make decisions affecting daily work assignments, but their effectiveness depends on understanding operational realities that can only be learned through direct experience with construction activities. The evening social activities that emerge spontaneously in the workers' village create informal networks that facilitate information sharing, problem solving, and mutual support among workers whose official relationships are defined by hierarchical authority structures. Games, storytelling, music, and casual conversation provide social interaction that helps maintain morale and group cohesion during the extended period required for pyramid completion. These informal social systems complement the formal organizational structures that govern construction work while creating community bonds that make difficult working conditions more tolerable. The religious observances that punctuate weekly routines in the workers' village reflect both traditional Egyptian religious practices and adaptations specific to the construction environment. Shrines dedicated to deities associated with craftsmanship, construction, and worker protection receive offerings and prayers from workers seeking divine assistance with technical challenges and protection from workplace hazards. Religious festivals provide breaks from construction routines while reinforcing cultural values and social solidarity that support collective effort toward common goals. As you participate in evening conversations with your fellow workers, you become aware of the different temporal perspectives that coexist within pyramid construction activities. The daily routine of cutting, transporting, and installing individual limestone blocks creates immediate focus on short-term technical problems and incremental progress toward daily production targets. But the overall project timeline extends across decades that encompass entire careers and lifetimes, creating planning horizons that exceed individual experience while requiring sustained commitment to long-term objectives. The mathematical calculations that govern pyramid construction creates another layer of temporal complexity that affects workers' understanding of their individual contributions to the overall project. The Great Pyramid will eventually contain approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, each requiring individual cutting, transportation, and installation operations that involve dozens of workers. The completion of 12 blocks during your daily work shift represents approximately 0.0005% of the total construction requirement, a contribution so small as to seem insignificant when viewed in isolation. Yet the accumulation of these minimal, daily contributions across thousands of workers and decades of sustained effort will produce architectural achievements that demonstrate the remarkable capabilities that emerge when human organization transcends the limitations of individual action. The pyramid rising gradually on the Giza Plateau represents not just monumental architecture, but proof that systematic coordination can achieve objectives that remain impossible through individual effort regardless of personal skill, dedication, or resources. The technological innovations that emerge from pyramid construction challenges will influence Egyptian architectural and engineering development for centuries after project completion. The ramp construction techniques developed to transport massive blocks to increasing heights, the precision measurement methods necessary for achieving dimensional accuracy in large-scale assembly, the logistics coordination systems required. To manage complex material flows, these innovations will be applied to future construction projects throughout Egypt and the Mediterranean world. The administrative systems developed to coordinate pyramid construction activities will establish organizational precedents that influence Egyptian governmental development in ways that extend far beyond construction project management. The documentation procedures that track individual worker productivity, material consumption, and technical problems will inform management techniques used throughout Egyptian bureaucracy. The hierarchical coordination systems that balance central planning with operational flexibility will provide models for military organization, agricultural administration, and commercial regulation as the evening draws toward the rest period. That will prepare you for tomorrow's continuation of construction activities. You reflect on the paradoxical nature of your participation in this massive collective undertaking. The daily experience of pyramid construction consists largely of repetitive physical labor. Under challenging environmental conditions, work that appears mundane and unremarkable when viewed from the perspective of individual shifts. Yet this routine labor accumulates into achievements that will influence architectural development, governmental organization, and cultural identity throughout human history. The precision and dedication that you bring to stone cutting, transportation, and installation work represent individual contributions that seem insignificant within the vast scale of pyramid construction. Yet the project's success depends absolutely on maintaining standards of technical accuracy and workmanship that can only be achieved through the committed effort of skilled workers whose professional expertise enables engineering achievements that push human capabilities toward new limits. The social relationships that develop among construction workers create informal support networks that help individuals cope with the physical demands and personal sacrifices required by extended participation in pyramid construction. These relationships combine professional cooperation necessary for effective teamwork with personal friendships that provide social interaction and mutual assistance during difficult working conditions. The community bonds formed during construction activities will influence workers' lives long after pyramid completion, creating social connections that extend across geographic and cultural boundaries. The economic relationships that connect pyramid construction to broader Egyptian society demonstrate the complex interdependencies that characterize advanced civilizations. The agricultural surpluses that provide food for construction workers, the craft production that supplies construction tools and materials, the transportation networks that connect construction sites with resource sources throughout Egypt. These economic systems require coordination and planning that exceed the requirements of pyramid construction, while depending on the organizational innovations that construction projects generate. As you prepare for sleep in the dormitory that houses your work gang, surrounded by the sounds of a community dedicated to collective achievement of unprecedented scale, you contemplate the most profound questions raised by your daily participation. In pyramid construction, what does it mean for human civilization when individuals commit themselves to projects whose completion will extend far beyond their own lifetimes? How do societies maintain dedication to long-term objectives when the daily experience of working toward those objectives consists primarily of routine labor that provides few immediate rewards? And perhaps most fundamentally, is the remarkable durability of pyramid architecture merely a consequence of construction techniques and materials? Or does it reflect something deeper about human nature's capacity for creating achievements that transcend the temporal limitations of individual existence, transforming the grinding routine of daily labor into permanent communes, to the possibilities that emerge when ordinary people dedicate themselves to extraordinary collective undertakings? You wake each morning in the city of Ekaterina to the unfamiliar sound of new prayers being chanted in a language that feels both ancient and startlingly modern. as priests of the Aten cult perform rituals that have existed for barely a decade, yet claim to represent eternal truth revealed by the divine sun disk. The year is 1340 BCE, the 14th year of Akhenaten's reign. And you are Merimosa, middle-aged administrator, who has spent your entire adult career serving traditional Egyptian religious institutions, now attempting to navigate the bewildering changes that have transformed not just religious practices, but the fundamental assumptions that govern daily life in the new capital city, built to honor a deity most Egyptians had never heard of before. The current pharaoh's revolutionary declarations. The city of Akhenaten itself represents the most visible manifestation of the religious and administrative revolution that has swept through Egypt during Akhenaten's reign. But for someone like you, a functionary, whose expertise lies in managing temple inventories and coordinating religious festival preparations, the most disorienting changes are the mundane procedural modifications that affect every aspect of daily work. The administrative forms you fill out each morning now begin with formulaic prayers to the Aten rather than the traditional invocations of Amun-Re. But the actual prayers remain unfamiliar even after years of practice, since the theological concepts underlying Aten worship differ fundamentally from the religious traditions that shaped your professional training. Your modest house and administrative district reflects the speed with which the new capital was constructed and the practical priorities that govern a city created to serve ideological rather than economic purposes. Unlike the ancient residential neighborhoods of Thebes or Memphis, where houses evolved gradually over generations to accommodate the accumulated needs of established families, your Akhenaten residence was built according to standardized architectural plans that prioritize rapid construction and efficient land use over the personalized details that characterize traditional Egyptian domestic architecture. The house consists of 4 rooms arranged around a small central courtyard, with walls constructed from mud brick manufactured at production facilities established specifically to supply Akhenaten's massive construction requirements. The standardized design reflects both the urgency with which the new capital was constructed and the egalitarian principles that theoretically govern life in a city dedicated to exclusive worship of a universal deity. Yet the practical realities of Egyptian social hierarchy remain apparent in the subtle variations that distinguish administrative housing from the quarters assigned to craftsmen, laborers, and the various categories of religious personnel who serve the Aten cult. The furnishings in your house combine traditional Egyptian domestic items with new objects that reflect Akhenaten's unique cultural environment. Your wooden bed frame and storage chests were transported from your previous residence in Thebes when you accepted reassignment to the new capital. But the decorative objects displayed throughout your home now emphasize Aten symbolism rather than the traditional motifs that adorned your former living spaces. Solar disk emblems, representations of royal family members worshipping under the Aten's rays, and hieroglyphic texts praising the sun deity replace the household shrines and religious images that provided spiritual focus in traditional Egyptian homes. The morning routine that begins each workday includes new elements that reflect Akhenaten's religious innovations while maintaining practical necessities that remain unchanged despite revolutionary ideology. You still wake before dawn, wash with water carried from the Nile, and dress in linen clothing whose basic design remains identical to traditional Egyptian garments. But the morning prayers that accompany these routine activities now address the Aten rather than the traditional deities who govern daily activities. And the prayers themselves employ theological language that emphasizes the sun deity's universal presence rather than the specialized protective functions that characterize traditional Egyptian religious practices. The walk from your house to the administrative complex where you work provides daily exposure to Akhenaten's most distinctive architectural features, while highlighting the practical challenges that arise when ideological priorities override traditional urban planning principles. The broad avenues that connect different areas of the city create impressive vistas that emphasize the monumental scale of temple construction dedicated to Aten worship. But these ceremonial thoroughfares prove less practical for routine transportation than the narrow streets that characterize older Egyptian cities. The geometric regularity that governs Akhenaten's layout reflects aesthetic principles derived from religious symbolism rather than the pragmatic considerations that shaped urban development in Egypt's traditional administrative centers. Your workplace occupies a section of the central administrative complex that houses the bureaucratic offices necessary to coordinate religious activities, manage temple resources, and maintain communication with governmental operations throughout Egypt that continue to function despite the capital's relocation. The office architecture emphasizes openness and natural lighting that reflects Aten theology's emphasis on solar illumination. But the practical requirements of administrative work, document storage, private consultation spaces, security for valuable materials create functional problems that traditional office design addressed more effectively than administrative responsibilities that occupy your daily attention. Involve coordinating supply deliveries for religious ceremonies that differ significantly from traditional Egyptian festival requirements, while maintaining the detailed record-keeping that enables effective resource management regardless of theological orientation. Aten worship ceremonies require different combinations of foodstuffs, incense materials, and liturgical objects than traditional Egyptian religious practices, creating procurement challenges that must be resolved through trial and error, since established supply networks remain oriented toward traditional religious requirements. The procurement procedures you employ must balance Akhenaten's theological requirements against practical limitations imposed by Egypt's existing economic infrastructure. Suppliers throughout Egypt continue to organize their operations around traditional religious calendars and ceremonial requirements, creating coordination challenges when Akhenaten's religious schedule conflicts with established production and transportation patterns. The specialized materials required for Aten worship ceremonies must often be obtained through custom orders that are more expensive and less reliable than the standardized religious supplies available for traditional ceremonies. The inventory management systems you maintain must accommodate both familiar administrative procedures and new categories of materials that reflect Akhenaten's unique religious requirements. Traditional temple inventories focused on precious metals, ceremonial objects, and foodstuffs whose functions were well established through generations of religious practice. But Aten worship involves new types of ceremonial objects, different incense blends, and modified dietary requirements that require developing new administrative categories while maintaining compatibility with Egypt's established bureaucratic procedures. The morning correspondence that requires your daily attention includes communications from traditional religious centers throughout Egypt that reveal the complex tensions created by Akhenaten's religious revolution. Temple administrators in Thebes, Memphis, and other established religious centers continue to operate according to traditional procedures, while attempting to accommodate royal directives that promote Aten worship and discourage traditional religious practices. The administrative coordination required to manage these competing religious systems creates bureaucratic challenges that have no precedent in Egyptian governmental experience. The royal decrees that arrive regularly from Akhenaten's palace introduce new religious policies that must be implemented through administrative procedures designed for traditional religious management, while addressing practical problems that emerge when revolutionary ideology encounters operational realities. Recent directives have ordered the closure of certain traditional religious festivals, the reallocation of temple resources toward Aten worship activities, and the modification of religious personnel assignments to support the new theological priorities. Each directive requires developing implementation procedures that achieve policy objectives while maintaining essential religious services that Egyptian society cannot function without. the personnel management responsibilities that occupy increasing. Portions of your daily attention involve coordinating the work of religious officials whose professional training prepared them for traditional Egyptian religious practices, but who must now adapt to atone worship requirements that demand different skills and knowledge. Priests whose expertise lies in traditional ritual procedures must learn new ceremonial practices, while scribes whose training emphasized traditional religious texts must master theological concepts and linguistic formulations that reflect Akhenaten's revolutionary religious orientation. The training programs that you help coordinate for religious personnel represent one of the most challenging aspects of implementing Akhenaten's religious revolution, since effective training requires instructional materials and experienced teachers that simply do not exist for religious practices that have been developing for only a decade. Traditional Egyptian religious training relied on centuries of accumulated knowledge preserved in temple libraries and transmitted through apprenticeship relationships that connected experienced practitioners with novice students. But ATN worship practices must be learned through improvised, instructional methods that lack the institutional support and accumulated wisdom that characterize traditional religious education as the morning progresses and the administrative tasks multiply. You become increasingly aware of the fundamental tension between Akhenaten's revolutionary religious agenda and the practical requirements of effective governmental administration. The theological principles that inspire Akhenaten's religious reforms emphasize simplicity, universality, and direct relationship between worshiper and deity that theoretically eliminates the complex hierarchical structures that characterize traditional Egyptian religious institutions. Yet the practical implementation of these revolutionary principles requires administrative systems that are, if anything, more complex and hierarchically organized than the traditional institutions they replace. The communication systems that connect Akhetaten with administrative operations throughout Egypt must accommodate both the new religious orientation that officially governs royal policy and the traditional religious practices that continue to function in areas where Aten worship has not been successfully established. This creates a dual administrative structure that requires maintaining separate communication channels, parallel reporting procedures, and coordinated policy implementation that addresses both revolutionary and traditional religious requirements simultaneously. The resource allocation decisions that you help implement must balance Akhenaten's ideological priorities against practical limitations imposed by Egypt's economic infrastructure and established administrative procedures. The massive construction projects that create Akhenaten's impressive architectural monuments require resources that must be diverted from traditional uses, creating economic pressures throughout Egyptian society. The specialized personnel required to staff Aten worship institutions must be recruited from traditional religious establishments, creating administrative gaps that affect governmental operations in established administrative centers. As midday approaches and the sun disk that provides theological inspiration for Akhenaten's religious revolution reaches its zenith above the new capital, you prepare for the afternoon's most challenging assignment. Participating in coordination meetings where administrators from different governmental departments attempt to resolve the practical problems that arise when revolutionary ideology must be implemented through administrative systems designed for traditional operations. These meetings represent both the most hopeful and the most frustrating aspects of Akhenaten's experimental approach to governmental administration, since they demonstrate both the possibility and the difficulty of translating ideological innovation into effective institutional change. But before the afternoon coordination sessions begin, you find yourself contemplating the most profound questions raised by your daily participation in Akhenaten's religious experiment. What happens to individual identity and professional purpose when the fundamental assumptions that govern society undergo revolutionary transformation? How do administrative systems maintain effectiveness when the ideological foundations that justify their authority are themselves subjects of ongoing experimentation. And what does it mean for the sustainability of revolutionary change when the daily experience of implementing new ideas consists largely of managing the practical problems that arise when utopian visions encounter the stubborn realities of human organization and economic necessity? The afternoon coordination meeting convenes in the Central Administrative Building's largest conference chamber, a room whose architectural design embodies the theological principles that guide Caden's religious revolution while highlighting the practical challenges that arise when ideological innovation must be implemented through existing administrative procedures. Unlike the traditional conference rooms in Thebes or Memphis, where meetings take place in enclosed spaces that provide privacy for sensitive governmental discussions, Achaetan's administrative chambers feature open rooftops and large windows that flood the interior with natural sunlight architectural elements that symbolize the Mtan's universal presence, while creating environmental conditions that make sustained concentration and detailed record-keeping genuinely difficult. The meeting participants represent the diverse administrative functions required to coordinate religious, economic, and governmental operations in a capital city that exists primarily to demonstrate new theological principles rather than to serve established administrative needs. Amenemhab, Chief Administrator of Religious Personnel, supervises the recruitment, training, and assignment of priests, scribes, and support staff required for Aton worship ceremonies. Kim Waset, Overseer of Temple Construction, coordinates the massive building projects that create Achaetan's impressive religious architecture. Senepmet, Administrator of Resource Allocation, manages the complex logistics systems that supply food, materials, and equipment for both religious activities and general urban operations. The formal agenda for today's meeting addresses three major issues that illustrate the administrative complexity created by Achaetan's religious revolution. Coordination of upcoming religious festivals that combine traditional Egyptian ceremonial elements with new Aten worship practices. Resolution of resource allocation conflicts between religious construction projects and essential urban infrastructure. Needs and implementation of royal directives that require modification of established administrative procedures to accommodate revolutionary theological priorities. The festival coordination discussion reveals fundamental tensions between Achaetan's revolutionary religious agenda and the practical requirements of maintaining social stability throughout Egypt. Traditional Egyptian religious festivals serve multiple functions that extend far beyond purely ceremonial activities. They provide scheduled breaks from routine labor, create opportunities for economic exchange between different regions, reinforce social hierarchies through prescribed ceremonial roles, and maintain cultural continuity through ritual practices that connect present activities with ancient traditions. Amenemhab presents analysis of the challenges involved in modifying traditional festival structures to accommodate Aten worship. Requirements while preserving the social and economic functions that make festivals essential for Egyptian society. The theological principles underlying Aten worship emphasize universal access to divine presence that theoretically eliminates the hierarchical ceremonial roles that characterize traditional festivals. Yet practical festival organization requires coordination, resource allocation, to crowd control that depend on hierarchical authority structures regardless of the theological principles that justify those structures. The economic implications. A festival modification creates additional administrative challenges that must be balanced against ideological objectives. Traditional festivals generate substantial economic activity through increased demand for ceremonial objects, special foods, and transportation services that benefit craftsmen, farmers, and merchants throughout Egypt. Festivals that eliminate traditional ceremonial elements risk disrupting economic relationships that support thousands of families while failing to generate equivalent economic benefits through new Aten worship activities. Kimwaset's contribution to the discussion focuses on the construction challenges that arise when religious architecture must embody new theological principles while accommodating practical requirements for effective ceremonial activities. Traditional Egyptian temples were designed over centuries of architectural development to provide appropriate settings for religious ceremonies whose requirements were well established through generations of practical experience. But Aten worship requires architectural solutions for ceremonial needs that are still being discovered through experimental practice, creating design challenges that must be resolved through costly trial and error processes. The resource allocation conflicts addressed by Set revealed the broader economic tensions created when revolutionary ideology requires massive capital investments that compete with essential governmental functions throughout Egypt. Akhenaten's construction projects require resources that must be diverted from traditional used limestone quarries that previously supplied building materials for provincial temples. Skilled craftsmen whose expertise is needed for infrastructure maintenance throughout Egypt. Transportation systems that must serve Akhenaten's construction needs rather than routine commercial activities. The discussion of resource priorities requires balancing Akhenaten's symbolic importance as a demonstration of Aten worship against practical requirements for maintaining governmental effectiveness throughout Egypt. The impressive religious architecture that makes Akhetana a visible symbol of Akhenaten's religious revolution requires continuing massive resource commitments that reduce resources available for traditional administrative functions. Yet abandoning Akhenaten's construction projects would undermine the credibility of the religious revolution while failing to recover resources already invested in partially completed projects. Your own contribution to the coordination meeting addresses the administrative personnel challenges that arise when governmental operations must accommodate both revolutionary religious requirements and traditional administrative functions that continue to be necessary regardless of ideological orientation. The recruitment of qualified administrators for Akhenaten's governmental offices requires individuals with traditional administrative training who are also committed to supporting revolutionary religious changes. Yet these dual requirements create conflicting selection criteria that make recruitment difficult while creating internal tensions within administrative organizations. The training requirements for administrative personnel create additional challenges that reflect broader problems in implementing revolutionary change through existing institutional structures. Traditional administrative training emphasized procedures, precedents, and established relationships that enabled effective coordination within stable institutional environments. But Akhenaten's revolutionary environment requires administrative flexibility, experimental problem-solving, and tolerance for uncertainty that traditional training did not develop and may actually discourage. The afternoon discussion gradually reveals a fundamental paradox that affects all aspects of Akhenaten's religious experiment. The implementation of revolutionary ideas requires administrative capabilities that can only be developed through the traditional institutional structures that revolutionary ideology explicitly rejects. Effective religious ceremonies require logistical coordination, resource management, and personnel supervision that depend on administrative expertise developed through generations of traditional religious practice. Yet the theological principles that inspire Akhenaten's religious revolution characterize traditional religious institutions as corrupt obstacles to authentic spiritual experience. The coordination challenges discussed in the afternoon meeting extend far beyond Akhenaten's immediate administrative requirements to encompass the broader governmental problems created when Egypt's capital city relocates to serve ideological rather than administrative functions. Communication with provincial administrators throughout Egypt requires maintaining to parallel administrative systems traditional governmental operations that continue to function according to established procedures and revolutionary religious administration that operates according to new principles that remain experimental and subject to frequent modification. The documentation procedures that you help develop for recording, meeting decisions, and coordinating. Implementation activities must accommodate both traditional, administrative requirements and new record-keeping needs created by Akatan's experimental governmental approach. Traditional administrative documentation emphasized precedent, consistency, and reference to established procedures that enabled effective coordination across different governmental departments. But Akatan's experimental approach requires documentation that captures ongoing policy development, records experimental procedures for future evaluation, and maintains flexibility for rapid modification. When experience reveals problems with initial approaches, the personnel assignments that emerge from the afternoon coordination meetings illustrate the complex human resource challenges created when revolutionary ideology requires administrative implementation through individuals whose professional training and personal experience prepared them for traditional rather than experimental governmental environments. Administrative officials who excel at implementing established procedures may prove less effective at developing new approaches to unfamiliar problems. Conversely, individuals who demonstrate creativity and flexibility in experimental environments may lack the systematic attention to detail that traditional administrative functions require as the afternoon session progresses through detailed consideration of specific administrative problems. You become increasingly aware of the emotional and psychological challenges that affect individual administrators attempting to maintain professional effectiveness while adapting to revolutionary changes in the fundamental assumptions that govern their work. The professional identity that sustained your career development was based on mastery of traditional administrative procedures, knowledge of established precedents, and accumulated understanding of institutional relationships that enabled effective problem-solving within stable organizational environments. But Akatan's revolutionary environment undermines these traditional sources of professional competence, while demanding new forms of expertise that must be developed through experimental practice, under conditions of considerable uncertainty about long-term institutional stability. The skills that made you effective in traditional administrative positions may prove irrelevant or even counterproductive in Akatan's experimental governmental environment. Yet the alternative skills required for success in revolutionary administrative environments cannot be acquired through traditional training or institutional experience. The social relationships that develop among administrators working in Akatan's experimental governmental environment combine professional cooperation necessary for effective coordination with personal support networks that help individuals cope with the psychological challenges created by participation in revolutionary institutional change. Traditional administrative environments provided clear professional hierarchies, established role definitions, and stable institutional relationships that enabled individuals to understand their organizational positions and career development opportunities. But Akatan's experimental approach creates fluid organizational relationships, undefined role expectations, and uncertain career prospects that make individual planning difficult while creating anxiety about professional future and institutional stability. The informal social networks that develop among administrators provide emotional support and practical assistance that help individuals maintain effectiveness while adapting to organizational uncertainty that traditional administrative careers did not require. The late afternoon light that streams through Akatan's open conference chambers creates dramatic visual effects that embody the theological symbolism underlying the city's revolutionary religious orientation, while highlighting the practical problems that arise when architectural design prioritizes symbolic over functional considerations. The bright sunlight that represents divine presence makes detailed document review difficult, while the open architectural design that symbolizes universal access creates privacy problems for sensitive administrative discussions. These practical Problems with Achaetan's architectural design reflect broader tensions between ideological objectives and operational requirements that affect all aspects of the religious experiment. The theological principles that inspire revolutionary change emphasize spiritual values that theoretically transcend practical concerns. Yet the implementation of revolutionary ideas requires sustained attention to practical details that determine whether ideological objectives can be achieved through institutional change as the coordination meeting draws toward its scheduled conclusion and participants prepare to return to individual departmental responsibilities. You contemplate the most challenging aspects of daily participation in Achaetan's religious experiment. The requirement to maintain professional effectiveness while adapting to organizational environments that remain fundamentally experimental and subject to frequent modification based on evolving understanding of revolutionary theological procedure, principles, and practical implementation. Requirements. The administrative decisions emerging from today's coordination meeting will affect religious ceremonies, construction projects, and personnel assignments throughout Achaetan while establishing precedents that may influence future policy development. Yet these decisions must be made within organizational environments that lack the institutional stability, accumulated precedent, and established procedures that traditional administrative decision-making relied upon for guidance and evaluation. And as you prepare for tomorrow's continuation of experimental administrative activities, you find yourself wondering whether the grinding complexity of implementing revolutionary ideas through bureaucratic procedures represents a fundamental limitation on the possibility of institutional change, or whether sustained commitment to experimental administration might eventually develop new forms of organizational effectiveness that transcend the limitations of traditional governmental approaches while achieving the spiritual and social objectives that motivate revolutionary religious movements. The evening hours in Achaetan unfold with a peculiar quality of suspended time that reflects the city's uncertain relationship to both Egypt's ancient past and its unpredictable future. As residents attempt to establish daily routines that accommodate revolutionary religious requirements while maintaining the practical necessities that sustain human life, regardless of ideological orientation. The sun disk that provides theological inspiration for the city's existence sets each evening behind the limestone cliffs that define Achaetan's eastern boundary, creating dramatic silhouettes that emphasize the natural beauty that attracted Achaetan to this site while highlighting the isolation that separates the new capital from Egypt's established population centers and economic networks. Your evening walk through Achaetan's residential districts provides daily encounters with the social experiment that accompanies the religious revolution. As individuals from throughout Egypt attempt to create community life in a city that exists primarily to demonstrate new theological principles rather than to serve established social and economic functions. The residents you encounter during evening social activities include traditional Egyptian administrative officials like yourself, craftsmen recruited to construct the city's impressive religious architecture, merchants attempting to develop commercial relationships in an experimental urban environment, and religious personnel whose professional lives have been transformed by commitment to Aten worship practices that remain innovative and experimental. The conversations that develop during these informal PMA social encounters reveal the complex personal challenges that arise when individuals must adapt their daily lives to accommodate revolutionary changes in the fundamental assumptions that govern social organization. Longtime Egyptian administrative officials discuss the professional difficulties created by new governmental procedures that conflict with traditional practices while acknowledging the intellectual excitement generated by participation in unprecedented institutional experimentation. Craftsmen describe the technical challenges involved in creating architectural solutions for religious requirements that lack established precedents while expressing pride in contributing to innovative building projects that push Egyptian architectural development in new directions. The social hierarchies that emerge within Acatedon's residential communities reflect both traditional Egyptian status, distinctions, and new relationships. Created by shared participation in revolutionary, religious, and administrative activities. Traditional markers of social status, family background. Professional specialization, accumulated wealth continue to influence social relationships. But these traditional distinctions compete with new forms of status based on commitment to Aton worship, effectiveness in experimental administrative roles, and personal relationships with royal family members who provide leadership for the religious revolution. The cultural activities that develop within Acatedon's social environment combine traditional Egyptian recreational practices with new forms of entertainment that reflect the city's unique religious and social orientation. Evening gatherings include traditional music, dancing, and storytelling that provide continuity with Egyptian cultural traditions. But these familiar activities incorporate new content that celebrates Aten worship, praises Akhenaten's revolutionary leadership, and explores theological themes that emphasize universal divine presence rather than the specialized protective functions that characterize traditional Egyptian religious practices. The religious observances that punctuate daily life in Akhenaten represent the most visible manifestation of the theological revolution that justifies the city's existence. Yet the practical implementation of new religious practices reveals ongoing tensions between revolutionary ideology and human needs that transcend particular religious systems. Evening prayers to the Aten follow prescribed formulas that emphasize the sun deity's universal presence and beneficent care for all living creatures. But these official prayers coexist with informal religious practices that address practical concerns about health, family welfare, and economic security that traditional Egyptian religious practices addressed through specialized deities and ritual procedures. The domestic architecture of your Akhenaten residence reflects attempts to accommodate traditional Egyptian family life within urban planning that prioritizes religious symbolism over practical considerations for daily living. The standardized housing design that enables rapid construction and reflects egalitarian theological principles provides adequate basic accommodation but lacks the specialized spaces and storage facilities that traditional Egyptian homes included for seasonal food preservation, craft production, and extended family activities that characterize normal domestic life. The economic relationships that sustain daily life in Akhenaten illustrate the broader challenges involved in creating sustainable community life in a city that exists primarily to serve ideological rather than economic functions. The merchants who supply food, clothing, and household necessities for Akhenaten residents must operate within economic networks that connect the new capital with agricultural and craft production throughout Egypt. But these commercial relationships face ongoing uncertainty about Akhenaten's long-term viability and the stability of governmental policies that support the religious experiment, the market activities that provide essential goods and services for daily life reflect both traditional Egyptian commercial practices and adaptations necessary to serve a community with unusual demographic characteristics and uncertain economic prospects. The temporary nature of many residents' commitment to life in Akhenaten creates commercial challenges for merchants whose investments in inventory, facilities, and customer relationships depend on stable community demographics that the city cannot guarantee as evening deepens and oil lamps illuminate homes throughout Akhenaten's residential districts. You engage in personal reflection about the long-term implications of your participation in revolutionary, religious, and administrative activities that may prove historically significant, but whose immediate consequences remain uncertain and potentially problematic for individual career development and family welfare. The professional opportunities available in Akhenaten provide access to innovative governmental activities that offer intellectual stimulation and potential advancement within experimental administrative systems. But these opportunities exist within institutional frameworks that lack the stability and established career paths that traditional administrative positions provided. The personal relationships that develop through shared participation in Akhenaten's religious and administrative activities create social networks that provide support for adapting to revolutionary institutional changes, while generating concerns about the sustainability of friendships and professional associations that depend on continued commitment to experimental, religious, and governmental systems. The colleagues with whom you collaborate on daily administrative activities share common challenges and professional interests that create strong working relationships. But these relationships exist within organizational environments that remain subject to sudden modification based on evolving royal policy and changing theological interpretations. The family considerations that affect your long-term planning illustrate broader personal challenges faced by individuals whose participation in revolutionary activities requires balancing ideological commitment against practical responsibilities for ensuring economic security and social stability for dependents, whose welfare extends beyond immediate experimental participation. The educational opportunities available for children in Akhenaten emphasize new religious teachings and innovative administrative practices that may prove valuable for future careers in experimental governmental systems. But these specialized educational experiences may prove less relevant for traditional career paths if the religious experiment fails to achieve long-term institutional stability. The correspondence that you maintain with friends and family members in traditional Egyptian cities provides ongoing contact with social and economic developments outside Akhenaten, while highlighting the growing cultural distance that separates participants in the religious experiment from individuals who continue to live within traditional institutional frameworks. Letters from former colleagues describe ongoing administrative activities in Thebes and Memphis that continue to function according to established procedures, creating a sense of parallel institutional development that raises questions about which governmental approaches will prove more effective for addressing Egypt's long-term administrative needs. The news that reaches Akhenaten from throughout Egypt reveals both support and resistance to the religious revolution that Akhenaten promotes through royal policy, while suggesting broader social and economic tensions that may affect the sustainability of experimental religious and administrative innovations. Reports from provincial administrators describe successful implementation of new religious practices in some areas, while documenting continued adherence to traditional religious customs in regions where Aten worship has failed to gain popular acceptance. The economic reports that document Egypt's overall prosperity during Akhenaten's reign suggest that the religious experiment has not significantly disrupted the agricultural and commercial activities that sustain Egyptian civilization. But these reports also reveal resource allocation patterns that may prove problematic if revolutionary religious activities require continuing massive investments in construction projects and administrative innovations that compete with traditional governmental functions. The tribute payments from subject territories continue to flow into Egyptian treasuries, but the allocation of these resources toward Akhenaten's development may reduce investments in military activities, infrastructure maintenance, and other traditional governmental responsibilities that ensure Egypt's continued prosperity and political stability. As you prepare for sleep in your Akhenaten residence, surrounded by the sounds of a community dedicated to religious and administrative experimentation whose ultimate success remains uncertain, you contemplate the most profound questions raised by sustained participation in revolutionary institutional change. What personal and professional commitments are justified by participation in social experiments whose outcomes cannot be predicted with confidence? How do individuals balance ideological conviction against practical responsibilities when revolutionary activities require sustained commitment despite uncertain prospects for long-term institutional success? The daily experience of living and working in Akhenaten provides constant exposure to both the creative possibilities and the practical limitations that characterize revolutionary approaches to religious and administrative organization. the intellectual stimulation generated by participation in innovative problem-solving, the social relationships formed through shared commitment to experimental activities, the professional opportunities created by involvement in unprecedented institutional development. These positive aspects of revolutionary participation compete with ongoing concerns about long-term sustainability, practical effectiveness, and personal consequences of committing career and family welfare to experimental systems that may prove historically significant but individually costly. The architectural monuments that rise throughout Akhenaten provide daily visual reminders of the remarkable achievements that become possible when revolutionary ideology motivates sustained collective effort toward innovative objectives. Yet these impressive accomplishments exist within broader contexts of resource allocation, social organization, and political stability that determine whether revolutionary experiments can achieve lasting institutional success or remain historical curiosities that demonstrate human creativity while failing to provide sustainable alternatives to traditional organizational approaches, and as sleep approaches in the capital city built to honor a deity, its universal presence supposedly eliminates the need for traditional religious hierarchies while requiring increasingly complex administrative systems to coordinate revolutionary religious practices. You find yourself wondering whether the most significant aspect of Akhenaten's experiment may not be its religious innovations or architectural achievements, but its demonstration of the fundamental tension between revolutionary ideology and institutional sustainability, the grinding daily challenge of translating utopian visions into practical organizational systems that can maintain effectiveness while serving human needs that transcend particular theological orientations or political experiments. The grinding routine of these daily live scribes whose red pens preserve eternity, administrators whose calculations coordinate millions, workers whose stones build forever, and revolutionaries whose experiments test the boundaries of tradition, reveals the patient accumulation of mundane activities that transforms human dreams into permanent achievements. In ancient Egypt, as in all great civilizations, my most remarkable accomplishments emerged not from momentary inspiration or heroic action, but from the sustained dedication of ordinary people who committed themselves to extraordinary collective undertakings, one routine day at a time. Through their daily labor, boring as it often seemed to those who performed it, these individuals created institutional capabilities that transcended anything possible through individual action, establishing foundations for architectural, administrative, and cultural achievements that continue to shape human civilization thousands of years after their creators returned to dust. Beside the Nile, their story reminds us that the most profound changes in human history often arise through the patient accumulation of precise, methodical, undramatic work that transforms routine dedication into permanent monuments to the possibilities that emerge when ordinary people commit themselves to purposes larger than their individual existences.